Lorraine Cox was a 32-year-old woman living in Exeter, UK. She is dating a man named Ellie who lives in Scotland. Although the distance between them is quite long, they have gotten used to it. At first, they only met on weekends and talked, but gradually their feelings for each other grew deeper. By 2020, they had been in contact in this way for 2 years. Despite the challenges of the distance, they decided to get engaged. Now, they are building a future together and preparing for their wedding. Lorraine is also planning to have their first child. However, in early 2020, their plans had to change for several reasons. By February, Lorraine had moved to Scotland to be with Ellie, where she obtained a temporary visa, and they spent considerable time together. When summer arrived, she wanted to return to Exeter to visit her family and friends for a month or two. This trip was not a breakup, she simply missed her loved ones. Afterward, she intended to return to Scotland and continue strengthening their relationship. Although restrictions in the UK remained strict, they were gradually relaxing, allowing public events to resume and many establishments to reopen. People eagerly took to the streets to socialize again, and Lorraine was no exception. On September 1, 2020, she arrived at her father's house in Exeter, excited to reconnect with friends. They spent the evening visiting several bars, enjoying drinks and good company, until they realized it was time to go home. Everyone left in a good mood. On September 2nd, Lorraine posted an unusual message on social media, claiming she was going to leave the country. This surprised everyone, as her only previous move had been to Scotland, and she had no plans to relocate again. She had just arrived to visit her father and intended to stay for at least a month. This sudden change in her mood and plans seemed out of character. In her post, Lorraine mentioned wanting to move about 50 kilometers from her father's house to a place called Plymouth, which she described as the first stop on her planned journey. This behavior was shocking because Lorraine was not known for making impulsive decisions, especially on such a significant scale. She had a stable life and a loving relationship in Scotland and had never mentioned wanting to move elsewhere. Now, she was considering a move toward France. Unsurprisingly, this post had a deep impact on Ellie. They had a strong relationship, making his fear of losing her understandable. Lorraine's friends bombarded her with questions. Initially, she responded willingly, but as the conversation progressed, her tone changed and mistrust grew. Those who knew her well noticed shifts in her writing style. She began using unfamiliar emojis, making odd mistakes, and her messages conveyed a sense of hostility. This worried her loved ones, as she had always maintained positive relationships with them, and there was no reason for her to display such aggression or undergo drastic life changes. Her father, Tony, who was hosting her during this time, even showed a family friend her old messages alongside the new ones. He pointed out clear inconsistencies in her writing style. Even those who didn't know her well noticed something was off. Throughout this time, Lorraine's boyfriend, who was named Ellie, was especially concerned and tried to understand her behavior. Initially, she responded to him with short, cold replies, but eventually, her answers became even more abrupt. The conversation ended when Lorraine sent him an emoji of a middle finger. This intensified the suspicion that someone else was using her account. Ellie had known Lorraine for 2 years, so the idea that the trip was related to a breakup or conflict seemed unlikely. They valued each other, which made her odd responses even more perplexing. Unfortunately, because of the distance, her boyfriend felt helpless and unable to intervene. A situation arose concerning Tony, Lorraine's father. Determined to discover the truth, he faced a challenge because he was away at the time and couldn't check his daughter's room for clues. Instead, he began speaking to Lorraine's friends, particularly those who had been with her the day before her sudden move to Plymouth. He was scheduled to return home the next day. Upon arriving home, Tony's first action was to go to Lorraine's room, where his suspicions grew stronger. He had already spoken with her close friends, and they all confirmed that no one had seen Lorraine since their breakup at the bar when everyone had left for the night. Inside Lorraine's room, it appeared as though she had never returned after her outing with friends. Her belongings from Scotland remained untouched, and nothing was missing from her room. It looked as if she had left for an extended trip without taking any of her things, which seemed impossible. The most alarming discovery was the bag she had left behind. Lorraine had diabetes and always carried a first aid kit to monitor her blood sugar levels. Her health depended on these supplies, and she never went anywhere, even for a quick trip to the store, without them. For outings like the one to the bar, she typically used a smaller bag. The fact that her larger kit was still in her room raised serious concerns about her recent plans. Tony realized that his daughter had not returned from the party, leading him to fear that something might have happened to her health. The messages she had exchanged with friends and relatives also seemed troubling. Worried, Tony sent another message to Lorraine on social media, expressing concern for her health and asking if she was okay. He warned her that if she did not respond, he would have to contact the police. The message was seen, but he received no reply. After that, Tony's and Lorraine's friends could no longer tolerate the uncertainty and began their search. They started by looking for clues in the bar where they had spent the evening on September 2nd. They interviewed witnesses, distributed flyers, and retraced the presumed route Lorraine would have taken home. It was clear that something alarming must have happened during her journey since she never came home again. Law enforcement and journalists quickly became involved. They were skeptical of the theory that Lorraine might have suffered a health crisis. Detectives believed that if that were the case, she would not have been able to send messages to her friends. Furthermore, several days had passed since her disappearance, and she would likely have been found in a hospital, but tests of recent admissions yielded no results. It appeared far more likely that Lorraine had encountered danger from someone. Journalists rushed to report on the situation, highlighting concerns over Lorraine's disappearance. They recalled that in May 2018, 2 years before Lorraine vanished, an attacker named Robert Proud had attacked a woman who strikingly resembled her. He had abused her but did not kill her, and then evaded capture for a long time. Given his criminal history, it raised fears that there could be more victims. Although he had completed his prison sentence, investigators began considering Lorraine as a potential victim. At the time of her disappearance, Robert was living near the path Lorraine would have taken home. This connection led to his arrest, and police sought to extract a confession from him. They believed he had kidnapped, abused, and possibly killed her, and that he might have disposed of her body. It was suspected that he took her phone and pretended to communicate with her friends and family to buy himself time and create confusion. There was another theory regarding Lorraine's disappearance. Some believed that Robert might have attacked her, but instead of dying, she was hiding to avoid becoming his victim again. The detectives prioritized finding Lorraine because she was clearly in danger. Robert might have been holding her hostage. The situation could have escalated, posing a significant threat. To test this theory, they began reviewing surveillance footage from cameras along Lorraine's potential route that night. Even after narrowing down the time frame, they had about 11,000 hours of footage from over 400 cameras across 120 different locations. Analyzing this footage was time-consuming, but it proved worthwhile, yielding the first clues needed to catch the criminal. Eventually, they spotted a girl who matched Lorraine's description in the recordings. After leaving her friends at the bar, she headed toward her father's house without making any turns. She almost made it home, but a few blocks away, something caught her attention: a kebab shop on the ground floor of an apartment building, which was open at night. Lorraine went inside, likely to grab a snack, and then left to eat on a bench before continuing her way home. Around 2:45 a.m., she returned to the kebab shop, but this time accompanied by an unfamiliar man. This raised alarms because he didn't appear to be just a random passerby. The footage suggested they had interacted, and he had managed to get her attention. The police continued to investigate the recordings and noted that the young man had been following Lorraine after they left the shop. This behavior was concerning, especially since she seemed to be walking voluntarily and the street was deserted. Detectives suspected the man might be a predator who targeted his victim, potentially involved in Lorraine's disappearance and the messages she had sent to her loved ones after the incident. He maintained a distance while following her, trying to remain inconspicuous, and seemed to be assessing the situation. It looked as though he was stalking her, especially since she appeared intoxicated and was stumbling. She had a valuable phone, and with no one accompanying her that night, he saw an opportunity to attack. The police attempted to locate another recording to determine how Lorraine left the building from at least one camera, but were unsuccessful. It appeared she had not exited at all. They spent considerable time reviewing the video footage, only to confirm that Lorraine had not left since she was last seen. The detectives concluded that she might still be inside, possibly being held against her will. Unfortunately, by the time they gathered this information, 8 days had passed. Given this long duration, only a miracle could save Lorraine, who suffered from diabetes. Nevertheless, her family held on to hope. The police obtained a clear photo of the man who accompanied and followed Lorraine that night. They printed it out and began distributing it through the media to attract witnesses. Initially, they visited the kebab shop and spoke with the owner. He informed them that he lived above the shop but had rented the apartment below to a young man about a month ago. This young man had moved in unofficially and was very withdrawn, to the extent that the owner didn't know much about him. The owner even expressed doubts about the young man's name. When police officers visited the apartment, they anticipated finding a crime scene. However, everything was surprisingly neat and clean. The young man living there identified himself as Christopher Mayer and showed them his identification. There was no sign of Lorraine in the apartment, and he allowed the detectives inside without any resistance. They inspected the place thoroughly to ensure that no one was being held against their will. Christopher was then shown a photo of Lorraine, along with a CCTV image in which a man resembling him was seen accompanying her to the house. He strongly denied any connection, claiming that he did not know her. However, the clear photograph made the police skeptical, as the similarities were unmistakable. A brief verbal confrontation ensued, with Christopher maintaining his stance. During this exchange, he insisted that he would never bring a strange woman to his apartment. The police then became interested in Christopher's mobile phone, which they seized for examination. They discovered that it contained Lorraine's SIM card, although the card was currently missing. This evidence confirmed that he had at least seen her recently. Further investigation revealed that a suspicious post had been made on Lorraine's social media account using this mobile phone. It appeared that Christopher had sent strange messages to her loved ones. After the unsettling incident, whatever it was, he had taken Lorraine's phone. Rather than using it for communication, he inserted a SIM card into his own phone to access her contact list and social media account. This raised further suspicions about Christopher. He was the last person confirmed to have seen Lorraine alive, and his attempts to manipulate her account seemed suspicious. It became clear that he was trying to cover his tracks, raising questions about his motives that the authorities still needed to uncover. Christopher was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of Lorraine Cox. That same day, forensic experts arrived at his apartment to investigate. They used a substance called luminol to carefully examine the area. While they found several suspicious traces of evidence, the most alarming findings were in a nearby alley. During their search of the apartment, they discovered blood and numerous signs that supported the theory that Lorraine was dead, particularly around a garbage can. The forensic team speculated that Christopher might have disposed of evidence by throwing away the body. They searched the alley and found a large plastic bag inside one of the trash containers that contained human remains. However, it was not a complete body. Some parts, including the torso and head, were missing, making identification difficult. Consequently, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a murder investigation, and the work continued. Detectives learned that on the night of Lorraine's disappearance, in addition to Christopher, 5 other young men were present. However, none appeared on the CCTV footage with Lorraine. These men likely entered the apartment to buy food or for other reasons, but their involvement needed further investigation. They could have unwittingly been present during the crime or could have assisted in covering up evidence. Notably, the group behaved very differently. Except for Christopher, everyone was cooperative and willing to provide information. Upon further investigation, the 5 other young men were found to be locals who lived nearby. Since there was no evidence against them, they were released. In stark contrast, Christopher was uncooperative, reluctant to talk, and often gave vague or confusing answers. He seemed to believe that the police lacked sufficient evidence against him, but they soon discovered that his real name was Azam Mangori. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation, as detectives confronted him with the truth, signaling the beginning of the unraveling of his story. Azam claims that he changed his name because he was born in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where people who do not follow tradition can face severe punishment, including being stoned to death. As an adult, he left his conservative homeland but still lives in fear of being hunted down and killed. To avoid this dangerous situation, he began calling himself Christopher. He had been living illegally in the UK since December 2018 to avoid returning to Iraq. Azam also possessed a high-quality fake ID under the name Christopher Mayer to evade detection by immigration authorities. This explains why the landlord knew almost nothing about the man. He was very cautious, had not attended school or worked anywhere, and lived off odd jobs. However, the interrogation ended abruptly. After admitting to these things, he refused to talk about Lorraine. His previous admissions were not significant to the police. DNA testing confirmed that the remains found in a trash bin were those of Lorraine. In Azam's apartment, DNA traces and other evidence indicated that Lorraine had been killed there because Azam had failed to clean thoroughly. The police also discovered a large handsaw and replacement blades purchased after the crime. Other items found included a driver's license, a debit card, and a wallet, all mutilated. Nearby trash bins contained bloody clothing, Lorraine's phone, and a SIM card discarded in the sewer. Unfortunately, parts of her body were never recovered. Detectives analyzed the location data from Azam's mobile phone on the day of Lorraine's murder and the subsequent days when he disposed of evidence. This investigation led them to a location on the city's outskirts known as Tin Pit Hill. During the search, they found Lorraine's torso and head, which were not well concealed. Investigators noted unsettling details. A piece of clothing was stuffed into her mouth, and a patch of skin was missing from her back, possibly taken as a trophy by the perpetrator. Unfortunately, no other body parts were located, and the remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, complicating the determination of the cause of death. The forensic expert concluded that Lorraine had likely been strangled. Despite strong evidence of his guilt, Azam continued to deny his involvement and created false stories. He even attempted to involve banned organizations in the case. The trial commenced in spring 2021. Although he never confessed, Azam and his defense team significantly altered his narrative. He now claimed to have a normal orientation and stated that he encountered Lorraine when she came to his place late at night after a bar visit. He approached her on the street and convinced her to come to his apartment for some intimacy. Azam maintained that Lorraine voluntarily came to his apartment after drinking heavily and using illegal substances. He claimed that after trying those substances himself, he experienced severe distortion of perception and lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, he found Lorraine in the bathroom, unresponsive. He alleged that he saw a puddle of urine beneath her and believed she had overdosed. Azam attempted to perform CPR, but it was unsuccessful. In a panic and without knowing the emergency number, he sat on the bathroom floor next to her body. Hallucinations then began, and he claimed to see dark creatures emerging from her mouth, prompting him to shove a piece of his t-shirt into her mouth to stop it. He pushed the cloth in so far that it could have caused her to choke. Despite being in a state of panic, he managed to find and send a video he had recorded around the same time to a friend, where he appeared calm and even exhaled smoke into the camera. He explained that he filmed the video to help himself calm down. His behavior grew increasingly bizarre. Instead of calling for help, he decided to dispose of the body and planned to flee from his relatives. Naturally, this account sounded implausible, leaving him with no solid defense. According to Azam, he was unsure what he would do after Lorraine died and kept her body in his apartment until he decided to dispose of it. When his anxiety reached its peak, he chose to throw it away. He called a taxi to take the bag with the remains to a wooded area on the outskirts of Exeter. Prosecutors noted that he seemed to be obsessed with amputation, as evidenced by the precise cuts he made, which horrified forensic experts. It was clear he had researched this topic extensively and was well prepared. That evening, Azam tried to connect with people on an escort website, seeking companionship but was unsuccessful. Later, He saw Lorraine on the street eating alone and viewed her as an ideal target. It seems that Ozem may have premeditated this murder to fulfill his dark fantasies. Even with substantial evidence against him, his trial lasted 5 weeks. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty of murder and attempting to obstruct justice. He received a life sentence but is eligible for parole after 20 years, which means he could be released at the age of 44. Lorraine's boyfriend, Ellie, experienced profound grief, stating that a part of him died with her. He lives daily with this pain and struggles against despair. Lorraine's father, Tony, organized a charity march to rally support for his daughter. Participants silently walked the route she would have taken from the bar to her home, a journey she never completed. In the aftermath, Tony became an activist advocating for more CCTV cameras on UK streets to help prevent and solve violent crimes. He also started to make regular donations to an anti-abuse organization based in the UK. Even after justice was served, Lorraine Cox's family remained uncertain about how Ozem was able to lure her into his apartment. Security footage showed her following him willingly. Ozem claimed that he engaged her in conversation and offered her alcohol and a banned substance, which she accepted. However, toxicology reports found no traces of banned substances in her system, and a forensic expert stated that she did not die from diabetes, suggesting that Ozem's account might be false. Sadly, the truth about what happened in his apartment may never be revealed, as only Ozem and Lorraine know what truly occurred. Some believe Ozem exploited Lorraine's kindness by asking for help, and that she may have felt unable to refuse, ultimately leading her into a dangerous situation. March was born in 1961 to Arthur March and Sephora. He and his wife, Janet, were complete opposites of each other. He is ordinary, but his wife was a very bright, beautiful woman, dreamy and talented. Janet grew up in a wealthy family, as the daughter of a well-known lawyer from Nashville. Janet and Perry met as students at the University of Michigan in the early 1980s and quickly became inseparable. When Perry graduated and moved to Chicago to work as a financial broker, Janet followed him without hesitation. However, she soon began to miss her home and family. To support Perry's education, her father agreed to pay for his expensive tuition at the prestigious Vanderbilt Law School. As a result, Janet and Perry returned to Nashville, and since Perry was hesitant, it was Janet who proposed to him in Percy Warner Park. They got married in 1987 and moved into a house in a well-known area of the city, which was rented and paid for by Janet's father. The following year, Perry graduated and chose to work for a local law firm in Nashville instead of accepting offers from large firms in New York. In 1990, Janet gave birth to a son named Samson, affectionately called Sammy. On the surface, this family seemed to have everything: a mother, a father, and a son. Unfortunately, this outward appearance of happiness was deceptive. In 1991, a scandal emerged at the law firm where Perry worked after a young female specialist received an inappropriate proposal from a colleague. A stranger sent her a letter expressing his attraction to her and his desire for an intimate relationship. Feeling embarrassed, the young woman reported the incident to her boss. After this, 2 more letters arrived, urging her to respond to the proposal by leaving a message in the firm's library. In response, the firm took measures to identify the sender of these inappropriate letters. They installed a CCTV camera in the library where she was supposed to leave her reply. When the man came to collect the letter, the firm's lawyers were shocked to discover that he was Perry March, the husband of Janet. Faced with evidence from the video, Perry refused to confess. The law firm gave him an ultimatum: resign or be fired. He chose to resign. This uncomfortable situation led to legal consequences, as the female employee who received the unwanted proposal sued Perry for financial compensation. He was ordered to pay her. To avoid a harassment claim, she requested $25,000, half of which Perry was to pay in monthly installments, while the remaining $12,500 was to be paid in a lump sum. This arrangement was made to keep his wife, Janet, from discovering the scandal. In 1994, Janet and Perry welcomed their second child, a lovely daughter named Sephora. As their family grew, they decided to build a larger home and purchased nearly 2 acres in the affluent suburb of Forest Hill. Over the next year, they worked on constructing their dream house, a $650,000 mansion designed in the French country style. Janet was very enthusiastic about the project and closely oversaw every stage of the construction. However, her demands were sometimes unreasonable, leading Perry to step in and help mediate between her and the construction team. Although the new house brought excitement, Janet and Perry's marriage was facing difficulties. Their relationship had been strained for several months, and they frequently attended therapy, both together and individually. At home, they rarely communicated. Perry was often away for at least 3 days a week, and their arguments escalated whenever he returned. A family therapist suggested they take a break from each other, but Janet was adamant about getting a divorce. In August 1996, a significant incident occurred that changed the course of Janet and Perry's relationship forever. Perry needed to pay the final installment to a woman at a law firm, but, due to financial issues, he sent her a letter requesting to postpone the payment until October. Unfortunately, Janet read the letter, which led to a heated argument between them. In the aftermath, Janet contacted her mother to arrange a meeting with a divorce lawyer. On August 15, 1996, Janet was scheduled to meet with the lawyer but never arrived at the office because she mysteriously disappeared that night. Perry claimed that Janet left voluntarily after their argument. He told the police that she expressed a desire to get some space to think but did not specify where she was going. He said that at around 8:30 p.m., Janet packed a suitcase, took her passport and $1,500 in cash, and left in her car. He also mentioned that she left him a list of tasks to complete before her return. After she left, he informed friends and family of her departure as he normally would. The next morning, Deneen Beard, the maid, came to clean the house and was surprised to find everything in order. However, Perry asked her to focus on her work and not to go into the children's room. Then a nanny named Ella Goldschmidt, who had previously arranged with Janet that her son would play with Sammy, arrived. After Deneen left, Ella noticed Sammy jumping on an oriental rug that was rolled up on the floor next to the playroom. When she returned around 2 p.m. to pick up her son, the rug was no longer there. Initially, Janet's family believed Perry's explanation. Janet's father went to Nashville International Airport to check if Janet had left her car there. Janet's mother, Carolyn, became increasingly worried, as her daughter would not just vanish without a word and would never abandon her children. Although Carolyn wanted to contact the police, Perry convinced her to wait 12 days, claiming that Janet had said she would return by then. That evening, Perry called his father, Arthur, a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel living in Jalisco, Mexico. Arthur readily agreed to travel to Nashville to support his son during this challenging time. In the meantime, Janet's family's concerns continued to escalate. With August 25th being Sammy's 6th birthday, fears grew that something had happened to Janet. She would definitely not miss such an important occasion. While Perry and Janet's parents told the party guests she had traveled to California to visit her brother and was postponing her return due to an ear infection, her sudden disappearance raised alarm among her loved ones. Days passed without any news from Janet, and the anxious waiting could not go on much longer. On August 29th, Janet's parents reported her missing to the police. Detective David Miller, a skilled investigator with extensive experience, was assigned to the case. He initiated the investigation by reaching out to hospitals and reviewing Janet's bank and credit card accounts, which had not been used since her disappearance, raising concerns about her well-being. On September 7th, authorities located Janet's car in a parking lot at an apartment complex about 5 miles from her home. The car appeared to have been parked there for several weeks. Inside, police discovered Janet's bag, which contained her documents, passport, credit cards, and $11 in cash. They also found a suitcase filled with clothes, notably absent of a bra, toothpaste, a comb, or underwear, which seemed unusual. Additional evidence included a pair of white sandals in the glove compartment and unusual, dirty bicycle tire tracks near the car. Investigators needed to analyze this evidence carefully. On September 10, 1996, Perry was questioned by investigators and consented to a search of his home. The police conducted the search over the weekend of September 14th to 15th while Perry was away in Chicago with his children. The house showed no signs of domestic violence or anything noteworthy. A few days later, the owner of a tire store contacted law enforcement to inform them that Perry had visited the store on August 21st, a week after Janet went missing. Perry inquired about purchasing a new set of tires, despite the good condition of those already on his car. When asked why he wanted a different brand, his response raised further suspicions. On September 18th, Perry decided to move to Chicago with his children. Before leaving, he had a concerning conversation with Janet's longtime friend, Diane Sachs, which she later reported to the police. Perry asked Diane if she thought he could kill his wife. Although she hesitated to answer, he proceeded to ask the disturbing question of what she would think if he had loaded Janet's body into his car and taken it to a remote location for disposal. This raised serious suspicions about him. As a result, the police launched a comprehensive search for Janet, involving divers, 2 helicopters with thermal scanners, specially trained dogs, police officers, and volunteers. Meanwhile, Perry hired a lawyer, who informed the police that Perry would not cooperate with the investigation. In November, as Janet's parents held a day of mourning for her, Perry chose not to attend, further increasing the police's suspicions about him. Over time, a theory about Janet's disappearance began to develop. It was suggested that Perry and Janet had a heated argument the night she disappeared. During this argument, Janet may have said something that provoked Perry, leading him to strike her hard. Given that Perry held a black belt in martial arts, a single blow could have killed her, or he might have strangled her. Whether intentional or not, when he found Janet dead at his feet, he was faced with a dire decision. Investigators believe that Perry hid Janet's body either in the basement, in the woods, or near their home. Furthermore, Ella had mentioned that there was a rolled-up rug that she had noticed in Perry's house that morning. Janet's body may have been inside that carpet, and tragically, little Sammy may have unknowingly played around his mother's body. Afterward, Perry moved her body to his Jeep and drove to a location where he buried it. He then drove Janet's car to where it was later discovered, taking her mountain bike with him so he could ride it back home. However, these are merely speculations, and the police were tasked with uncovering evidence of the murder, marking a new phase in the investigation. Janet's father, a prominent lawyer, was determined to uncover the truth about his daughter's disappearance. Meanwhile, Perry applied to become the manager of Janet's estate, but her parents opposed this and filed their own petition. Perry refused to consent. Ultimately, the court designated a guardian to oversee Janet's property and ordered Perry to return some items he had taken. He only returned them after being urged to do so. This was just the beginning of a legal dispute between Perry and Janet's parents. The battle continued until late 1999 when the court granted Janet's parents the right to visit their grandchildren. They traveled to Perry's new home in Illinois, eager to see the children, but were shocked to discover that he had moved to Mexico to be with his father. Moreover, just weeks after relocating, Perry married a local woman named Carmen Rojas. 3 years had passed since Janet went missing, and she still had not been officially declared dead. This prompted her parents to file a lawsuit against Perry for the manslaughter of their daughter. When Perry did not appear in court to contest the charges against him, the judge ordered him to pay $113.5 million in compensation to Janet's parents in May 2000. Janet's parents traveled back to Mexico to confront Perry and requested to meet his children. He firmly refused their request, prompting them to return to Nashville. A month later, they returned to Mexico with a court order and assistance from local police, who arrested Perry for violating his visa. Although the charges were eventually dropped, by the time Perry got back home, his children were missing. Taking advantage of Perry's absence, Janet's parents took the children to the U.S. and sought permanent custody once they were home. This led to a direct confrontation and sparked another legal battle for custody. Ultimately, Perry regained custody, and Janet's parents were reprimanded for unlawfully taking the children. Later, the Tennessee Court of Appeals overturned Perry's manslaughter conviction. At this point, Perry believed he could lead a stable life in Mexico with his new wife and children, feeling confident that nothing would disrupt his plans. However, unexpected developments were on the horizon, as the local police department, along with 2 investigators, continued to actively investigate Janet's case. In the latter half of 2004, the prosecutor's office introduced new evidence that led to a retrial, during which 59 witnesses were heard. This resulted in charges against Perry for second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. In October 2005, an arrest warrant and a request for extradition to the United States were issued for Perry. While being transported, Perry was accompanied by Pat Postiglione, one of the detectives involved in the investigation. During the journey, Perry was quite talkative and asked the detective whether he could face murder charges if an accident occurred. He also told Pat that he would be willing to confess everything if he could receive a sentence of no more than 7 years. The detective stated that he would pass this information on to the district attorney. Janet's parents were determined not to allow Perry to enjoy a new life after spending a short time in prison. They submitted a new petition for custody of the children, which the judge approved. Facing difficulties in the legal system, Perry sought another solution. He attempted to persuade his cellmate, Russell Ferris, to kill Janet's parents. Russell became interested in the plan and learned that Perry's father, Arthur, would act as the intermediary. After 2 months of discussions among the three, Russell's lawyer notified the police about Perry's offer to kill Janet's parents. From that point on, Perry's situation became increasingly complicated. Initially, the evidence against Perry for murder was weak and mostly circumstantial. His lawyer argued that there was no solid proof that Perry had committed the crime. If he had been found not guilty, he could not be tried again for the same offense. However, the situation changed dramatically with the discovery of a murder-for-hire plot involving Janet's parents. Now, the police had recorded conversations revealing details of the planned murder, including statements made by both Perry and his father, Arthur. When Arthur listened to the recordings, he realized his errors and agreed to testify against his son in exchange for a more lenient sentence. The disturbing truth emerged. Arthur, Perry's father, revealed that his son had confessed to him about killing Janet. A few weeks after the murder, Perry sought his father's help because he was anxious about the body being discovered. He asked Arthur to help hide it. One night, they drove to a location where, according to Arthur, the body was already decomposing and stored in a bag. Arthur recounted loading the remains into Perry's Jeep. They then traveled north to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where they stayed at a motel. Under the cover of darkness, Arthur attempted to dispose of the body. He looked for a body of water deep enough to conceal the remains but was unable to find one before sunrise. Eventually, he located a suitable spot. Arthur later attempted to guide investigators to the location where he had hidden the body, but he couldn't specify the exact spot. However, both the police and the jury believed his account of the incident. According to Arthur, after Perry killed Janet, her body remained in their home for some time, wrapped in a rug. Unfortunately for Arthur, his confession did not yield the leniency he had hoped for, and he died just months later while incarcerated. Perry faced a much harsher fate. He was convicted of second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, abuse of a corpse, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder, resulting in a 56-year prison sentence. He is currently incarcerated at the Morgan County Correctional Complex, where he assists fellow inmates with their legal appeals in the prison law library. He will be eligible for parole in 2038. Tragically, Janet's remains have never been found. Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziel Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Crizzle Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Seabeal. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked, and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwyn. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body, her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwyn, near the main door, crews found Lewis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before crews arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as crews continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, crews immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwyn, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwyn. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Lewis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwyn's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwyn might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Lewis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, crews confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Mlang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwyn and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwyn had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. Though the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwyn's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwyn in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwyn. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help." After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, so why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwyn was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwyn, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders, however, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lovella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motive stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwen and Louis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwen's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwen's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders. He had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believed Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine, the family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwen's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwen, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lovella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwen and Louis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Magwad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lovella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder. To their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sebiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwyn and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwyn almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. Around 4 p.m. on Friday, April 15, 2011, in Lorgues, France, 27-year-old Alexander Durand was on his way home when he received a call from his younger sister, Séverine. She was a high school student, and the siblings had a close relationship, often calling each other. However, today she called not to share good news or weekend plans. Instead, she informed him that their mother, Colette, had not picked her up after school as she usually did. The day before, Séverine had been with their father, who had taken her to school in the morning. She had tried calling their mother multiple times, but her calls went unanswered. This was unusual because their mother was normally very responsible, and there was no reason for her not to come and pick up her daughter. Séverine was worried that something might have happened, such as an accident. She advised Alexander to check the situation and visit their mother's house. Alexander was also worried, so he called his mother several times, but received no response. Finally, he decided to visit his mother's house himself. When Alexander arrived, Séverine was already there, but she was still very anxious, even more than before. She was in the house with the gendarmes, and what they discovered was very concerning. Colette's car was parked in the driveway, the doors were unlocked, and the keys were in the ignition. 52-year-old Colette had vanished without a trace. The keys to the house were also in the car, so Alexander took them and went inside to see what was happening. The house was completely empty, as if she had simply disappeared. The gendarmes quickly began their search for Colette since the situation was becoming increasingly alarming. Initially, they suspected a robbery, but they found that nothing was stolen from the house. The doors and windows were untouched. In the back seat of the car, they discovered Colette's purse, which held all her identification, bank cards, and cash. She could not have left willingly without those items. Tension heightened. Even after 3 hours of searching, there was still no news. Both the house and the car were thoroughly examined, but no leads emerged. As a result, the search area was expanded to include the outskirts of the town. None of the neighbors had seen anything out of the ordinary, no suspicious noises or activity near Colette's home. To learn more about her, the police interviewed her relatives. Colette, a divorced mother of 4, was known for her reserved and calm demeanor. She was not someone who would spontaneously disappear. She had no mental health issues or addictions. At the time, Colette was working as a supermarket manager. She was polite, punctual, and a devoted mother. Everyone who knew her was confused and did not understand what had happened, as she had no troubling relationships and no history of violence. The evidence suggested that Colette's disappearance was not accidental. The police believed that whoever was involved in this incident was someone she was very familiar with. At the very least, Colette had allowed this person into her house or had given them the right to enter. After investigating, the police identified the primary suspect. She lived by herself in a small two-story house. To save on expenses, she rented the first floor to a man named Bernard. During his interview, Bernard made some strange and unsettling remarks. He speculated on how Colette might have been abducted, suggesting that she could have been struck on the back of the head, rendering her unable to call for help. He also provided a detailed account of her medical condition, noting that she was diabetic and needed urgent assistance to avoid serious health consequences. His level of knowledge about Colette raised suspicions among the police. Furthermore, Colette's son, Alexander, revealed that Bernard was in love with his mother, which could explain his insight into her behavior and routines. This revelation increased suspicions, as Bernard could potentially have a motive. Alexander noted that, despite Bernard's interest, his mother did not reciprocate and had no intention of developing anything beyond friendship. She was solely focused on her children and her work, completely dismissing the idea of a romantic relationship with Bernard. When detectives investigated Bernard's background, they found that he had a criminal history. In 1999, he assaulted his girlfriend with a weapon after she tried to end their relationship. His ex described him as very hot-tempered and unable to control his rage. As a result of these incidents, suspicions about Bernard increased. Colette's lack of interest may have caused him to become angry, and what happened next remains unclear. In 1999, Bernard received a brief 6-year prison sentence for an attack, mainly because the girl he attacked survived. Now, he was called to the police station for questioning as the primary suspect in Colette's disappearance. The police were trying to determine when Colette went missing, and Bernard claimed to have useful information. He reported that on the afternoon of April 14, 2011, while watching television, he heard noises coming from the second floor, where Colette had lived. He could hear footsteps on the wooden floor, but then everything went quiet. He did not see Colette leave, making it likely that he was the last person to have seen her. However, the police were concerned about Bernard's behavior. He was unable to recall the exact time of the noises or even remember what show he was watching, raising further suspicions. Bernard's main problem was that he didn't have a verifiable alibi. However, there was no evidence against him, so the police had to let him go. The next morning, officers came to inspect his house. Bernard greeted them with shouts and was initially unwilling to let them enter. Eventually, he agreed to show them around the first floor of the rented property but continued to make odd comments. Notably, he pointed out a hatch that led to the basement. He remarked that if he had killed someone, he would have hidden the body there, yet he insisted he was innocent and claimed the basement was empty. Upon inspection, there was indeed no one there. Meanwhile, when law enforcement searched Colette's home, they discovered suspicious stains believed to be washed blood, but this could not be confirmed. Despite the lack of evidence, suspicion remained around Bernard. Deciding to keep a close watch on him, the detectives sought to establish the exact time of Colette's disappearance, but clues were scarce. She had been alone for several days with minimal contact with her neighbor until April 15th. Anything could have happened during that time. Investigators began to piece together her movements, partly based on Bernard's statement that he had heard loud noises from the floor above on April 14th, the day before she vanished. As the investigators looked into the case, they realized that no one had seen Colette since April 15th. They managed to locate her friend, who stated that he had last seen Colette on April 14th around 3:30 p.m. at a gathering with mutual friends. He mentioned that after leaving the party, she got into her car intending to drive to Draguignan but planned to stop at home first. This was the only information available and was considered a starting point for the investigation, as more than 40 hours had passed since she went missing. Communicating with Colette's friend helped them determine a rough timeline for when she went missing. In her car, investigators found not only her personal belongings but also her mobile phone. They began analyzing the phone to see whom Colette had communicated with in the hours leading up to her disappearance. Notably, There was a call that lasted about 40 seconds, made shortly before 3:30 p.m. The call was from Sylviane Fabre, Colette's ex-husband's sister. Sylviane was contacted, and she stated that she had met Colette during Colette's marriage to her brother. At that time, Colette's relationship with her husband was not very good, so they decided to separate. However, afterward, the former spouses and their families managed to maintain friendly relations. Sylviane mentioned that back in 2008, they collaborated with Colette to invest money in a joint business. Shortly before Colette's disappearance, the business partners had a small conflict regarding these assets, but Sylviane claimed that everything was resolved, and they continued to work together. Together, Sylviane and Colette created a real estate company that generated a substantial income, which provided Sylviane with a potential motive. Not only were they distant relatives, but they also had shared finances and property, which can often lead to such conflicts. Naturally, Sylviane denied any wrongdoing. Colette's daughter mentioned that Sylviane often had conflicts regarding their joint activities. They could argue and reconcile several times a day. However, Colette's daughter described all these disputes as minor issues that were resolved quickly. The gendarmes checked Sylviane's schedule for the last few days. She had an alibi confirmed by her son. For almost the entire duration of the investigation, suspicions against Sylviane were not substantiated, and the search operation again hit a dead end. On April 17, 2011, the prosecutor's office began a judicial investigation into the disappearance of Colette. With no leads left and all suspicious individuals cleared as unlikely suspects, there was no option but to notify the media and hope, with their assistance, to obtain new witnesses who might have noticed something. At a recent press conference, officials announced that while there were priority leads in the criminal investigation, no suspects had been identified. This news sparked significant interest among journalists, as the case could potentially involve themes of business, money, love, or betrayal. Consequently, rumors began circulating about Colette immediately, some of which were quite alarming. Her information, background, and photos quickly became prominent in newspapers and on television. Her children expressed their desire to see her again and shared how difficult her absence was for them. The most concerning aspect was that the critical 48-hour window for finding her alive had already passed, significantly diminishing the chances of a successful rescue. While the prosecutor's office hoped to gather new leads from the public through the media, the police were actively searching the nearby villages. Following the press conference, the search area was widened, and a special investigative unit took over the case. Colette's disappearance began to attract national attention. The media frenzy intensified as they attempted to connect her case with another notorious crime that had recently shaken France. A few days before Colette went missing in early April 2011, 5 members of the Dupont de Ligonnès family, including the wife and 4 children, were found murdered under the terrace of their home in Nantes. The head of the family, Xavier, disappeared shortly after the murders, having been spotted on the outskirts of the city on April 15. Authorities believe Xavier was responsible for the crime, and he was placed on a nationwide wanted list. Notably, the location of the massacre was only 30 kilometers from Colette's home. The media quickly linked these incidents together. The timing coincided with Colette's likely disappearance, raising the possibility that Xavier kidnapped her. An even stranger coincidence was that the Dupont de Ligonnès family lived in a house that Colette had sold in 1992. Xavier was viewed as a respectable citizen, a devoted husband, and a caring father who was engaged in his community and known for his honesty and fairness. However, it later emerged that Xavier was deep in debt at the time he murdered his family. Just days before the killings, he purchased cement, tools, and 4 bags of lime, suggesting he had a motive and was preparing for the crime. Journalists speculated that Xavier may have had a grudge against Colette, but the reason for his potential revenge remained unclear. Rumors spread quickly, with theories ranging from a fraudulent real estate deal to unrequited love. Others suspected it could be part of a planned escape. Xavier could have taken Colette so they could be together again. Witnesses came forward, claiming they had seen Xavier's car near her home. Some even reported seeing him stop in town on April 14. Although these accounts seemed unlikely, detectives noticed clear connections between Xavier and Colette. This led them to investigate the possibility that the two had escaped together. Consequently, Colette shifted from being seen as a victim to potentially being viewed as an accomplice in crimes that might have involved Xavier's family. However, friends and family of Colette quickly disputed this theory, asserting that she was not capable of cruelty. As detectives explored new leads that emerged almost daily, they became convinced that there was no romantic or conspiratorial link between Xavier and Colette. They began to feel that the similarities between Xavier and Colette were merely coincidental or tragic coincidences. To definitively eliminate this theory, they decided to examine both Xavier's and Colette's mobile phones. They encountered a challenge. Xavier's phone could not be tracked, and there were no calls or messages from Colette's phone to his. After their investigation, they found no evidence of any contact between the two after the sale of the house. Although the theory regarding Xavier was intriguing, it ultimately consumed valuable police time and resources. 3 weeks after Colette's disappearance, any possible link to Xavier was dismissed. Xavier himself was never found, leaving the French police at an impasse. The case has reached a dead end and will not make any progress until at least May 15, 2011. On this day, about 30 kilometers from Lorgues, 2 tourists were returning from a forest hike and taking photos. While using a remote path to capture some scenic shots, they were hit by a strong, unpleasant smell coming from the side of the path. One of the tourists decided to investigate the source of the odor. As the woman approached a pile of stones, the smell intensified and became unbearable. When she moved one of the stones, she discovered a leg protruding from beneath the rocks. The tourists quickly called the police. Within minutes, gendarmes arrived at the location and found the body of a woman in an advanced state of decomposition, making it difficult to determine her gender. Only her clothing provided a clue. The police attempted to identify the victim but were initially unsuccessful. They took photographs of her clothes, accessories, and jewelry, which were then shown to the families of various women who had gone missing in the area. Among those families were the children of Colette. Her daughter and son recognized their mother based on what she was wearing. Although the gendarmes believed they had identified Colette a month after her disappearance, they chose to wait for more conclusive evidence. DNA analysis was necessary to confirm family ties, as appearance alone could not provide definitive proof. Ultimately, the examination verified the police's suspicions. The body was indeed identified as Colette Durand. On May 17, 2011, an autopsy was conducted on the body that had been found at the Forensic Medical Institute. Unfortunately, the condition of the remains was so poor that the exact cause of death could not be determined. The forensic expert did confirm that Colette had not been abused before her death, but it did not help the police make much progress in the case. As a result, the investigation into her disappearance shifted focus to a murder investigation. On June 9, 2011, Colette's body was buried. Law enforcement officers attended the funeral, knowing that criminals sometimes show up at such events to witness the impact of their actions. Some may seek to relive their emotions, while others might derive satisfaction from seeing the grief of the victim's family. Several officers remained in vehicles, while others blended in with the attendees, discreetly observing the proceedings. During this time, the police noted that Sylvian, Colette's business partner and sister-in-law, was missing from the funeral. Although Sylvian and Colette were close, Sylvian's absence raised suspicions. This concern increased a few days later when Sylvian attempted to end her life. Although she survived with minor injuries and poisoning, her actions were alarming. When the police arrived after a call from Sylvian's neighbor, they found Sylvian lying on her couch at home. She was unable to fully express herself, so she was taken to a medical center for assistance. However, the officers did not leave empty-handed. They discovered a lengthy letter addressed to her son, David Perel, which was several pages long. While the letter did not contain explicit confessions regarding her actions concerning Colette, the detectives interpreted it as a potential admission of guilt prior to her death. The police decided to speak with David, and he provided new insights into the troubled relationship between Sylvian and Colette. He believed that shortly before Colette's death, she and Sylvian had experienced a serious conflict related to their shared business. Intrigued, the detectives asked David to recount his activities on April 14th. He described the daytime as uneventful, but his account of the evening was much more compelling. On April 14th, at around 10 p.m., Sylvian asked David to drive her to Colette's house to discuss some important business matters. Her own car was broken, so she turned to him for help. However, on their way, his car also broke down a few kilometers from home. Despite the rain, they decided to walk back instead. He took the car battery with them, and together they returned in an attempt to fix the car. On the night Colette disappeared, this mother and son spent hours in the rain attempting to repair a car left outside the city. The gendarmes suspected that David was trying to create a questionable alibi to explain his absence from home. This suspicion was further fueled by Sylvian's initial statement to the detectives, in which she claimed she had spent the previous days at home. It seemed implausible that she could forget such a significant event. When Sylvian regained consciousness in the medical center, her account of the events changed. Her new story mirrored what her son had previously told, including all the important details. The gendarmes decided to investigate her claims. They found that on the night of April 14th to 15th, there was no rain in the area. Additionally, it was odd that Sylvian and her son were unable to flag down a passing car for a ride home. Why did they walk so far while carrying a battery with them? The road's vehicle monitoring system revealed that approximately 5 cars passed by during the time they were walking home. It seemed unlikely that none of these drivers would have stopped to assist them in the rain. This raised suspicions that David and Sylvian were hiding something and might be involved in the death of Colette. Unfortunately, there was no physical evidence to support these suspicions. As a result, the decision was made to keep a close watch on them over the next few months. Their phone calls were monitored, and on February 8, 2012, this surveillance yielded important information. The police intercepted a conversation between Sylvian and Bernard, who was Colette's neighbor. It became clear that Bernard knew much more than he had initially revealed. On April 14th, he not only heard sounds coming from above but also saw Sylvian's car arrive at the house, indicating he was aware of her actions. David, Sylvian's son, was also involved, as he was driving for his mother. On February 20th, 2012, David and Sylvian were arrested. Detectives viewed David as the weak link. During questioning, he quickly confessed, seeming relieved to unburden himself of his guilt. He revealed that on April 14th, they arrived at Colette's home around 3:30 p.m. Afterward, Sylvian lured her into a barn behind the house. A business dispute led to further conflict, during which Sylvian attacked Colette, beating her to the ground. Then, she took a rope from the barn and began to strangle Colette in front of David. Although he did not intervene or participate in the attack, he admitted to helping move the body afterward. They left Colette's body on the property, covering it with a tarpaulin. In the evening, when they fabricated the story about the broken car, they took the body out of town. David assisted Sylvian in dragging the deceased away from the road and covering her with stones. Despite David's confession, Sylvian denied any wrongdoing. She claimed the death was accidental and that they hid the body out of fear of the police. However, it was puzzling how well prepared she seemed for the crime, as she had latex gloves that prevented her from leaving fingerprints. After being detained for 48 hours, Sylvian was charged with murder, while David was released. Though he was viewed as an accomplice, his testimony needed verification, so he remained under judicial supervision. The next step was to determine the motive. It turned out that the motive was linked to financial issues. Sylvian's business was on the brink of failure when Colette uncovered that Sylvian was embezzling money from clients. Another possible motive was jealousy, as Colette was thriving while Sylvian's problems continued to grow. Shortly before the tragedy, Sylvian had gone through a painful divorce, and one of her 2 sons had been convicted of violence. Communication between her and David had nearly ceased, and his involvement in the crime marked the end of their close relationship. On January 21, 2014, David was charged in court with the murder of Colette. He claimed that he was only an accomplice and that he helped hide the body due to pressure from his mother. Sylvian, his mother, argued that the incident was an act of involuntary manslaughter. She explained that she had lost her temper after a conflict with her business partner, Colette, who was trying to take everything from her. Facing life in prison, Sylvian sought to downplay her guilt. The prosecutor's office looked into the role of the tenant, Bernard. Although he witnessed the conflict between Sylvian and Colette, he did not report it because he feared Sylvian. Ultimately, he testified as a witness for the prosecution. On January 23, 2014, the jury found Sylvian Fabre guilty of manslaughter, sentencing her to 30 years in prison. Bernard was acquitted, and David Perel received a 3-year suspended sentence. Over the years, Colette's children struggled to understand what had happened in that barn with their mother. Despite the complicated trial, they felt uncertain that the entire truth had been uncovered. They were unhappy with the court's verdict, believing that Sylvian had committed premeditated murder but had received a lenient sentence. Additionally, they felt Bernard was more involved than he had admitted and had evaded responsibility for the crime. The case of Colette Durand is a tragic and mysterious story that leaves many unanswered questions for her family and the community. Colette, a devoted mother, suddenly disappeared, leading to a lengthy investigation filled with suspicions of love, money, and betrayal. Ultimately, the truth was revealed through David's confession and Sylvian's sentencing, but was justice truly served? Bernard, the neighbor with a murky past, remains a significant question mark as he evades all charges. For Colette's children, the pain lies not only in losing their mother but also in the feeling that the secrets surrounding their mother's death may be buried forever. Angel Ormston was born in 1975 in Mentor-on-the-Lake, a quiet suburb of Ohio, USA. This area has about 7,000 residents, and everyone knows each other. Children from local families often get along and grow up together. Life here is very simple and similar. The local high school serves as the main place of learning for most young people in town. Angel is a friendly and cheerful girl. She particularly enjoys walking around the area with her friends and often drives around with loud music. Local teenagers often gathered at a large shopping mall in a nearby, bigger city, which featured restaurants, a movie theater, and various stores. It made sense that Angel would find a part-time job there. In the summer of 1992, she started working at a fast food restaurant as she prepared for her senior year of high school. This job not only allowed her to earn some pocket money but also helped her save up for college. Her daily routine was consistent. She worked in the mornings and spent time with friends afterward. On the evening of July 31, 1992, 17-year-old Angel planned to go to her restaurant to pick up her paycheck and do some shopping. She promised her mother, Jackie, she would be home before the mall closed. Initially, her mother was not concerned and went to bed, assuming she was out with friends. The next morning, she woke up to find Angel missing from her room. Despite this, she didn't worry too much because it was common for her daughter to stay over at friends' houses, especially on weekends and holidays, so she pushed her uneasy thoughts aside. In this close-knit community, crime was rare, and young people often visited each other without worry. However, Angel, a high school student, didn't always keep her mother informed, which led to concerns. Her mother didn't want to restrict Angel too much, allowing her daughter considerable freedom that matched her independent spirit. Angel's upbringing was relaxed. Her mother was adaptable and aimed to maintain a harmonious environment. Meanwhile, her father was often away as a long-distance truck driver. Despite the lack of strict rules or curfews in the Angel household, unsettling thoughts began to creep into Jackie's mind. Angel was missing all Saturday, and when her mother woke up on Sunday to find she still hadn't returned home, worries began to set in. She called families where Angel could stay, and her brother also went to the shopping center where she worked. Upon arriving at the parking lot, Angel's brother noticed her Honda Civic, which heightened his concern. He hoped to find Angel inside but instead found her purse, comb, and other personal items left on the driver's seat, indicating she might have vanished. He checked the burger joint where she worked but learned she hadn't shown up for a couple of days. Alarmed, he contacted Jackie, their mother, who hurried to the shopping center to retrieve Angel's car and uncover the truth while pushing aside her fears. Initially, she hoped it was just a series of coincidences. Angel often went out at night with her best friend, Stacy. That day, Stacy's family could not be reached, which gave Jackie some peace of mind. Nonetheless, anxiety grew as Jackie drove around the mall looking for Angel, but she found no trace of her daughter. Friends who did manage to contact her hadn't seen Angel since Friday. By 8 p.m., Jackie still couldn't reach Angel, deepening her worry. Jackie finally decided to report her daughter Angel as missing by going to the police. Although Angel was last seen on July 31st, Jackie did not visit the station until August 2nd. This delay raised suspicions among the police, but Jackie explained that she believed she needed to wait 48 hours before reporting someone missing. Jackie provided detailed information about Angel, including her life and relationships. Jackie asserted that, up until the very last moment, she was not worried that anything serious had happened to Angel. On the morning of Monday, August 2nd, Jackie managed to reach Stacy, who confirmed Jackie's fears. Stacy had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and hadn't seen Angel. She was shocked to learn that her friend had been missing for over 2 days. Stacy tried to contact some mutual friends, but none had seen Angel. Following this, Jackie provided the police with new information, prompting them to initiate an active search for Angel. The police first examined Angel's car, which showed no signs of a struggle. The car was in normal condition, with no blood, signs of theft, or forced entry. The officers believed Angel may have left the car willingly. Given her age, they suggested she could have run away, but Jackie rejected this idea, citing their good relationship. Angel was not involved with banned substances and had always remained calm during her teenage years. Despite her independent nature, she was not the type to run away. In fact, she had been making future plans, including furthering her education at university. Detectives worked extensively to investigate Angel's disappearance. They suspected she might have been kidnapped from the car and collected many fingerprints at the scene. Although there were numerous prints, all belonged to family and close friends. Despite this, every individual had to be investigated to clear them as suspects since there were no other leads. The investigation began with Angel's father, a truck driver, but he was quickly ruled out because he had a verified alibi. He was in another state when his daughter went missing. Next, detectives looked into Angel's mother, Jackie. Her refusal to take a polygraph test raised significant suspicion and drew the attention of the investigators. They noted her delay in contacting the police and her decision to take Angel's car from the parking lot soon after learning about the disappearance, which further fueled suspicions. The police lacked the authority to compel her to take a polygraph test, and there was no direct evidence against her. As a result, the investigation continued with Jackie being the primary suspect. Jackie claimed that on the evening when Angel left home, she intended to go to a burger place. However, interviews with local staff revealed that Angel never arrived to pick up her paycheck that day. Investigators seized the opportunity to gather more information from Angel's colleagues. They quickly eliminated Jackie from the list of suspects due to Angel's good relationship with her family. However, they developed several other theories, including a suspicious connection to a former manager known for inappropriate behavior toward female employees. Investigators suspected that the former manager had been spying on female staff while they changed into their work uniforms. Later, he was fired for a harassment incident. Several female employees reported that this manager had touched them inappropriately. When the police investigated him, they discovered he had a criminal record for inappropriate behavior with minors, making him the main suspect. Other women also mentioned that he frequently focused on Angel, often looking for chances to be alone with her in the kitchen and making inappropriate comments. When this was discovered, the detectives were so focused on the case that they overlooked Jackie. The former manager was quickly located and interviewed, but he denied any involvement in Angel's disappearance. He said that she hasn't seen him since they worked together. He claimed that, on the day she went missing, he was far from his hometown and provided a timesheet showing that he was at another location of the fast food chain that day. Despite this evidence, detectives did not exclude him as a suspect and continued to question everyone at the restaurant, including both staff and management. Through their investigation, they uncovered a secret that Angel had kept from her family. She had been fired for consistently being late. While she was indeed heading to the restaurant to collect her final paycheck, this revelation did not provide any new leads regarding her disappearance. Gradually, all of Angel's co-workers were ruled out as suspects because they had alibis. Neither Angel's former manager nor her mother was considered a viable suspect in the case, making it difficult for the police to conduct their investigation. Communication with Angel's closest friends did not reveal any new information. Everyone was shocked at the idea that someone in her circle might wish her harm. She was gentle, trusting, and usually avoided conflict. However, her trusting nature made her vulnerable to someone who might manipulate her into a dangerous situation. After a long period without contact, fears grew that Angel had died. She hadn't reached out to anyone, appeared in public, or used any payment methods. Given these circumstances, the police decided to re-examine the people closest to her, as those responsible for such crimes are often found among acquaintances. The focus shifted to her best friend, Stacy. Although they had spoken to her briefly before, this time the interview lasted over 4 hours. From the start, Stacy expressed a strong willingness to help but firmly denied any involvement. She was cleared as a suspect when she provided a confirmed alibi. She had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and they had been together the whole time, cooking side by side. The police are trying to ask Stacy if she knows about Angel's relationship with a man. Stacy revealed that Angel had recently become interested in a young man named Mark Sotka, a 19-year-old who had just graduated with honors from their high school. Stacy explained that Angel had been in love with Mark for a long time and even hoped to start a serious relationship with him. However, Angel was very private, especially about her relationships, and only Stacy knew about Mark, not even sharing it with her mother. During the questioning, Stacy reveals that Angel was aware of her pregnancy shortly before she disappeared. They had talked several times about the possibility of telling Mark about the baby, and Angel was optimistic that he would accept her and the child, viewing it as the start of their life together. Stacy was doubtful, but Angel was convinced she could build a family with Mark. The detectives decided to investigate Mark's background before confronting him. It appeared that Mark was not ready for fatherhood. Just before Angel went missing, he started college, which suggests he may have only considered Angel a short fling while planning to focus on his studies. They found no incriminating evidence against him, as he had a clean record and a solid reputation in school. Eventually, Mark was called to the police station for questioning. He was surprised to learn that he was considered a suspect in Angel's disappearance. He denied any involvement and refuted Stacy's claims about their relationship. When he learned that Angel might be pregnant, he laughed it off, dismissing it as a fabrication by his girlfriend. He admitted to having had a brief encounter with Angel at the beginning of summer but said they had not met again since then. Additionally, he had been in a relationship with another girl for 2 years. To support his claims, he needed to provide proof and a reliable alibi. Mark testified that he left work at 5 p.m. on July 31, 1992 to go to a shopping mall. He intended to buy a gift for his girlfriend and then meet friends at a pizzeria. The police began to investigate his account closely. His employment at a car dealership was verified through his timesheet, which matched his claimed working hours. Additionally, they found a receipt for the gift purchase. Several friends from work supported his story, confirming he was at the pizzeria until around 9 p.m. The only inconsistency was that some staff members at the places he visited that evening did not remember him. However, Mark willingly took a polygraph test, which showed no evidence of his involvement in any crime. As a result, he was cleared as a suspect. The investigation hit another dead end, prompting detectives to revisit earlier theories of escape or kidnapping. Discovering that Angel might have been pregnant reinforced these theories. Her family may have opposed her having a child at just 17, leading her to potentially run away to start a new life with the baby. Unfortunately, these possibilities did not bring them any closer to finding her. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Angel's mother decided to take action. She reached out to the community through local media in hopes of gathering information. Her appeal successfully raised awareness about Angel's disappearance, turning the incident into a well-known topic of discussion. Friends and concerned individuals joined in, distributing thousands of leaflets. Charities became involved, and a fund was established, raising $10,000 as a reward for anyone who could provide useful information for the investigation. In the following weeks, the police department received numerous requests for information, which opened several new leads for the investigation. Detectives conducted thorough checks, but these efforts did not yield any significant results. Frustrated, Angel's family made the decision to hire a private detective. When Angel's father returned from a trip, he was hopeful that it would help locate his daughter, unlike the ineffective efforts of the police. However, despite the detective's hard work, no new information emerged. 3 months passed, and there were still no updates on Angel's case. By this time, her friends had almost lost hope, but her mother remained determined. Angel's mother, Jackie, even altered the message on their answering machine, leaving a note for her daughter in the hopes that she would eventually call. She refused to believe that anything bad had happened to Angel. Meanwhile, the entire city was critical of the police for their lack of progress, which led to increased pressure on law enforcement to revisit existing leads and suspects. Eventually, detectives began to focus on a man who was engaged to Angel's best friend. He was very interested in finding out what happened to her and was vocal in his criticism of the investigation. His name was Candle. Even though he showed a strong interest in Angel, he did not give any information to the detectives or the media. It was believed that he had attempted to start a relationship with Angel and was rejected, which might have led to her kidnapping or murder. On the day she went missing, he was working at a shoe store in the shopping mall where she was last seen. He had a confirmed alibi for that time, but after work, he could have committed a crime, especially since he was nearby. He allowed investigators to search his car, but nothing suspicious was found. The investigation had reached another dead end. On December 15, 1992, 4.5 months after Angel's disappearance, a local resident was out hunting with his dog. While walking through the forest, the dog became uneasy and led its owner away. This took them to a drainage ditch, where the hunter noticed something wrapped in a sheet and tied with a rope. Upon closer inspection, he saw a human hand protruding from the package. The man quickly contacted the police. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered a body in an advanced state of decomposition. Identification was possible only through dental records, which confirmed that it was 17-year-old Angel Ormston, who had been reported missing. On December 16, Angel's family was informed of her death. An autopsy showed she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which might not have been fatal. However, she had sustained 2 stab wounds to the chest, both delivered with significant force, impacting her heart. As a result, she bled out quickly and died. Investigating her death was complicated by decomposition, but fibers resembling those from a blue carpet were found at the scene. The police compiled a list of all homes associated with Angel, including those of neighbors, family, and friends, in search of a home that might have green carpeting. One key location of interest was the house belonging to Mark, who might have been the father of Angel's unborn child. At the time of the murder, the house was empty as it was for sale. Witnesses claimed they saw Mark enter the house with a girl who matched Angel's description. Although the house had been sold by then, the new owners allowed detectives to inspect it. Most rooms had been renovated, except for the basement. Upon entering the basement, the police found a blue carpet that matched the fibers collected from the scene. Additionally, a clothesline similar to the one used by the killer to move the body was discovered in the laundry room, matching the one found on Angel. The new owners reported that both the carpet and the clothesline had been left behind by the previous owners. These items were sent for forensic analysis, and tests confirmed that the microscopic fibers and the rope matched those used in the crime. Furthermore, a bloody fingerprint was discovered in the basement. 5 months after Angel disappeared, on December 31, 1992, 19-year-old Mark Sotka was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his arrest, he insisted that the police had no evidence against him and claimed he was not the person they were looking for. He immediately refused to cooperate with detectives, prompting forensic experts to conduct a detailed examination of his car. They discovered that although he had attempted to clean the interior, a few small drops of blood remained. During questioning, Mark eventually broke down due to the overwhelming evidence against him. He admitted to committing an act he described as stupid. When pressed for more details, he confessed to murdering Angel. Mark explains that he invited Angel to his house for intimate relations again, but things changed that night when she revealed that she was pregnant and that he was the father. This news triggered a violent outburst from him. He demanded that she get an abortion, but she refused. An argument ensued, during which Angel threatened to cause problems. In a fit of rage, Mark struck her several times in the face. Angel fell in the garage, and Mark, grabbing a knife, returned to the basement and stabbed her twice in the chest. Afterward, he calmly met with his friends at a pizzeria, chatting and laughing as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, he wrapped her body in a sheet, secured it with a clothesline, and transported it in the trunk of his car to a wooded area, where he left it in a ditch. Afterward, Mark returned home, covered up the evidence of the crime, and cleaned his car. After 5 months of investigation, he was arrested as the killer. During questioning, Mark confessed to first-degree murder and led authorities to the location where he disposed of the knife used in the crime. Despite thorough searches, the knife was never found. However, he had limited chances of proving his innocence. The motive for the attack stemmed from Angel's pregnancy, which disrupted his future plans. Mark had no intention of continuing his relationship with her and wanted to focus on someone else. In February 1993, to avoid the death penalty that was in place at the time, Mark officially admitted his guilt. Consequently, he was sentenced to life in prison but became eligible for parole after 30 years. Angel's family pointed out that Mark showed no remorse or compassion, which explained how he was able to deceive the polygraph test. Following his sentencing, he was taken to jail. After serving 20 years, Mark utilized an old Ohio law that allowed him to request a parole hearing after 2/3 of his minimum sentence. His family was informed, and Angel's relatives increased their efforts to prevent him from being released. Their efforts were successful, and he was denied parole in July 2023. After serving 30 years, Mark appeared before the parole board again, but this time, Angel's family opposed his release once again. As a result, he remains in prison. Angel's family expressed their relief to the media, calling it a significant victory for them. Her mother stated that their family would continue to fight to keep the killer incarcerated and would never forgive Mark, who has never expressed remorse or sought forgiveness for taking Angel's life and the life of her baby. Zoe Gabrielle Campos was born in September 1995 in Lubbock, Texas. She was the youngest daughter of her parents, Melinda and Alejandro Campos III. She had an older sister, Savannah. Their father served in the Navy infantry, which caused the family to move frequently, but after a few years, they eventually returned to Lubbock. Melinda and Alejandro eventually divorced. While growing up, Zoe had many different hobbies, but most of all, she loved animals. Zoe's mother said that the girl often brought home stray animals. She has a kind heart, wants to help all animals, especially dogs, cats, and turtles. Zoe was very close to her mother from a young age. Her mother mentioned that people often joked about how Zoe and she had forgotten to cut the umbilical cord. Zoe was an incredible daughter, sister, and friend. She was cheerful, funny, but very caring. Zoe was also interested in mechanics and spent her free time repairing cars. Shortly before her disappearance, she started working on an old car that she hoped to restore herself. Her mother said that if Zoe could open a pet store next to an auto repair shop, she would definitely do it. Zoe had a wonderful relationship with her sister Savannah, and they spent a lot of time together. Savannah had 2 children, and Zoe loved being an aunt. She enjoyed taking her nephew fishing at a lake not far from their home. Despite being only 18 years old, Zoe was very mature and extremely responsible. She didn't go out partying, preferred the silence and cozy atmosphere at home. Unfortunately, all of this was taken away from her. On November 17, 2013, Zoe spent most of the day with her family. Later that evening, she planned to go to her friend April's house, where a baby had just been born, and April invited her closest friends to celebrate the occasion. It was not a big party, but rather a small gathering of friends, and of course, everyone there knew April. However, not all the guests knew each other. It was a normal evening. Everyone was chatting, and a friend mentioned that Zoe left around 9 p.m. because she planned to go to dinner with her sister Savannah. They intended to spend the evening with another friend. Savannah later reported that during dinner, Zoe was as carefree as ever. After dinner, everyone went to watch a movie. When the sisters returned home, Zoe planned to spend the night at Savannah's house to take care of her nephew and niece the next day while Savannah was at work. Savannah stated that the movie ended at 11:30 p.m., and during the film, Zoe seemed to fall asleep. When they got home, Savannah went to her room, thinking that Zoe would sleep on a couch in the living room, unaware that the next morning, her sister would be gone. Zoe left the house later that night when Savannah went to bed, which was out of character for her. It is known that Zoe left home at night from an emergency message her mother received at 2:30 a.m. Melinda worked at a bar that closed around that time, and she was pleasantly surprised when she got a message from her daughter, asking for a ride home. Melinda waited for about 30 minutes, but Zoe never showed up. Initially, Melinda was not too troubled and tried to call her daughter, but Zoe didn't answer. Melinda thought that maybe Zoe had simply fallen asleep. Melinda reached a friend's house near the bar and stayed there overnight, planning to return home in the morning. On November 18th, Zoe's sister woke up and began getting ready for work. Seeing that Zoe was not on the couch and not in the house, Savannah immediately started calling her. When Zoe didn't answer and her car wasn't parked outside, Savannah thought Zoe might have gone home early. She called again, but each time, the call went straight to voicemail. Savannah then contacted her mother and realized that she also couldn't reach Zoe. Panic ensued. Savannah and Melinda started calling hospitals to see if perhaps Zoe had been in an accident. However, after several hours without contact or any information, the women finally reported Zoe's disappearance to the police at around 5 p.m. The police could only accept a missing persons report after 24 hours. Fortunately, they agreed to send out a profile of Zoe's car and attempted to contact her mobile service provider. They were informed that Zoe's phone was either turned off or the battery had been removed. Then, a surprising coincidence occurred. Zoe's aunt, Monica Rivas, was driving through the city on November 20th when she spotted her niece's gray Lincoln car near the university on 62nd Street. Monica immediately followed the car, trying to see the driver, but found it difficult due to the tinted windows and the car's speed. Still, she managed to determine that the driver was a man dressed in a hoodie with a darker complexion, and he appeared to be about 20 years old. As Monica followed the car, a lot of questions raced through her mind. Was Zoe in the car? Had this person harmed her? These thoughts nearly overwhelmed her, so she decided to focus on following the car while calling her son to explain the situation. However, the driver of the pursued car seemed to realize he was being followed and tried to escape. Eventually, Monica lost sight of the car when it turned sharply south, but she persisted in her search. When her son joined her, they found the Lincoln parked near Zoe's apartment. Monica immediately called the police and had to wait about an hour for the officers to arrive. Unfortunately, Zoe was not in the car, and she remained listed as missing. After inspecting the car, the police discovered several items: a phone charger, a black jacket, a sweatshirt, and some duct tape. They collected all of these items as evidence and lifted fingerprints from the vehicle. Since Zoe's father was an active member of the Marine Corps, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service became involved in assisting with the investigation. They took the jacket for forensic examination to look for any traces that could lead them to Zoe. The investigators also needed to find out if anyone had seen her on November 17th from 11:30 p.m. onward. Based on her latest text messages, mobile phone operators helped to estimate her approximate location, which indicated that she had been within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field, a local football field. This area had a reputation for crime and other societal issues, which surprised Zoe's friends and family. Zoe did not use illegal substances and had no involvement in what is known as human trafficking, raising their concerns about the location where she was last seen. The investigators tried to speak with everyone who had been at April's house the night Zoe went missing, hoping someone might have heard or seen something unusual regarding Zoe's behavior or conversations. They discovered that a man named Carlos Rodriguez attended the party. When questioned on November 25th, Carlos claimed he did not know Zoe before they met at April's but mentioned they had conversed briefly. He stated that they left at almost the same time, but the investigators found something odd in his story, something felt insincere. As a result, Carlos was called in for additional questioning on December 9th. During this session, the investigators received significantly different information. Carlos admitted he had lied earlier, that he and Zoe communicated on Facebook after leaving April's. He said they had agreed to meet at his house that night to chat, but he continued to deny any involvement in Zoe's disappearance. He claimed she had come over, they intended to smoke marijuana, but when they had none, so Zoe left to find some and never returned. Carlos explained his initial deceit was due to not wanting to get in trouble over banned substance. However, he became the primary suspect in the case. Given that he had lied previously, investigators wondered if he was telling the complete truth this time. It turned out that his house was within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field. In 2014, Zoe's family hired their own investigator to pursue any leads they came across, and they received numerous messages from community members eager to assist in the investigation. The investigators insisted that Carlos knew more than he disclosed. Eventually, they obtained a search warrant and investigated his residence. The police dogs brought and found several traces of Zoe's scent in that house and in the alley. The police conducted thorough searches of the premises but found no additional evidence. Over the course of 2015 and 2016, the entire community aided in the search, spreading awareness by posting flyers featuring photos of Zoe in hopes that someone might remember her or provide clues. As the years passed, Zoe's family and loved ones clung to hope for her safe return. On November 16, 2016, relatives and community members held a candlelight vigil to honor Zoe, who had gone missing 3 years prior. Over the years, investigators continued to seek the truth from Carlos. He was repeatedly called in for questioning, yet each time, his account of meeting Zoe evolved. However, when investigators found DNA on Carlos's jacket, he had to admit that Zoe had been in his house and in his room for some time. That night, Carlos was interrogated at the Lubbock County Detention Center. During investigations into Carlos, it was revealed that he had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, who said Carlos had threatened her with violence on several occasions. At that point, investigators were sure there was more to his story, but they needed concrete evidence before they could request another warrant. Then, another inmate, who was serving time with Carlos, mentioned in a conversation about the search that was being conducted at Carlos's house that, "The police have searched, the body will not be found until the concrete is removed." This statement was later confirmed by an informant who, on July 31, 2018, contacted detectives to tell them that Carlos had confessed to him where he hid Zoe's body. The informant provided specific details from Carlos's words about where the body could be found, which was enough to obtain another search warrant. In November 2018, the same team of police officers, accompanied by service dogs, went to conduct a search in the backyard. The dogs alerted the police, and they began digging in that area. Eventually, they discovered a set of bones. The bones were sent for examination, but before determining whose they were, there was no certainty that they were human remains. Carlos was called in for questioning, and in the middle of the interrogation, when the bones were mentioned, he fell silent, refused to talk until he was granted access to a lawyer. The lab results came quickly, revealing that the bones were not Zoe's, but rather animal bones. Investigators decided not to inform Carlos of this, as his reaction when the bones were mentioned suggested that the investigation was close to solving Zoe's case. In the following days, Carlos was closely watched, as were those he communicated with. After monitoring some of his conversations, investigators realized that Carlos genuinely believed they had found Zoe's remains. On November 14th, the police used ground-penetrating radar to identify additional areas to dig. However, before digging commenced, Carlos requested to speak with the lead detective. During this meeting, Carlos gave a full confession. He explained that on the night he and Zoe were together, they decided to use an illegal substance. After taking it, he went crazy, hit Zoe hard in the face, put her in a chokehold, and took her life. Carlos claimed that he buried Zoe that night in his backyard and later relocated her body to a deeper grave. Investigators took Carlos to the residence where he showed them the location of Zoe's remains. Just after 10 p.m. on November 16, 2018, Zoe's decomposed remains were found. Carlos was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest warrant stated that Carlos Rodriguez confessed to killing Zoe in the house in which he committed the crime early in the morning of November 18, 2013. Zoe's remains were sent for forensic examination. Since much time had passed and the body had decomposed, they had to use dental records to confirm the identity of the remains. Zoe's father explained that when he sat down with relatives and told them that the body belonged to Zoe, everyone felt some relief, knowing that Zoe was not lost or suffering, and while this part of the tragedy was over, the pain remained. Despite Carlos's full admission of guilt, he later maintained in court that he was innocent. He also published a letter intended for the media in which he reiterated his claim of innocence, stating that he and Zoe had met at April's house for the first time and that they had shared some flirtation. Carlos claimed that when he sent Zoe a message on Facebook late at night, they agreed to talk at his house. He stated that during the conversation, his mind, clouded by the substance, distorted reality, leading him to perceive Zoe as having an evil grin before he struck her. He said he did not remember how he managed to catch up to her, and that he regretted the actions he took, having lived for 5 years with guilt over the murder. Carlos apologized to Zoe's family in his letter, asking them to forgive him and encouraging them not to succumb to hatred. He also claimed he had to bury Zoe's body after it began to be unearthed by dogs. He and his lawyers prepared for trial, arguing that his original confession had been coerced because he had not been represented by a lawyer at the time. However, the judge ruled that both Carlos's oral and written confessions were legally obtained, could be used in court. On August 15, 2022, Carlos changed his plea from not guilty to an open plea, meaning he did not make a deal with prosecutors but planned to use his chances in court. He faced a minimum sentence of 5 years and a maximum of life imprisonment. After a brief deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict on August 18, sentencing Carlos Rodriguez to life imprisonment for the murder of Zoe Campos. The Jacobson family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and a beautiful home in Wellington, Florida. They appeared to be the ideal loving family. However, appearances can be misleading. Behind the facade of their perfect life lay a much darker reality. What was meant to be a joyful birthday celebration for their 2 young boys turned into a devastating event, leading to a tragedy so profound that the entire nation would remember their names. To fully grasp this story, we need to go back to 1989 when Neil Jacobson met Frankie at a gym in Bayside, Queens, New York, where they both lived and worked. They are ambitious and successful in their careers. Frankie was making her mark at Lehman Brothers, a leading firm in finance, while Neil had established his own boutique firm on Long Island. They were young, driven, and aspiring to achieve the American dream. Those who knew them praised their relationship as one filled with deep admiration and affection. Frankie was entirely devoted to Neil. In turn, he was seen as a charismatic and kind man with immense potential. Within his family and social circles, he was often regarded as a golden boy, intelligent, charming, and seemingly unstoppable. Together, Neil and Frankie appeared to be the perfect couple. They soon took the next step in their relationship by getting married and moving into Neil's home in New Jersey. Transitioning into married life was easy for them. Together, they created a comfortable, rewarding life filled with shared interests and adventures. They did everything, enjoying activities like biking, scuba diving, and weekend trips to the countryside, which helped strengthen their bond. To an outside observer, their life seemed perfect. However, amidst their seemingly ideal marriage, they felt something was missing: children. They desperately wanted to start a family, but the path to parenthood was challenging. For years, they endured the painful reality of infertility, going through multiple fertility treatments that brought both hope and disappointment. Despite the emotional toll, they remained determined. Finally, in 2003, after many struggles, their dreams came true when they welcomed twin boys, Joshua and Eric. With their lives already comfortable, Frankie and Neil experienced happiness beyond what they had ever imagined. Their family felt complete, and they thrived both personally and professionally. Neil's parents, Harold and Goldie Jacobson, moved from New Jersey to Florida in 2000. Although they loved their new home, they missed being close to their son and his family. They often expressed their frustration about the distance and wished for more time with their grandchildren. In 2005, Harold was diagnosed with cancer, and his health deteriorated rapidly, making it impossible for him to travel to New Jersey. This situation was a turning point for Neil. Being far from his father during such a critical time was too much to bear. He decided to move his family to Florida to be closer to his parents. Before the move, Neil had already started investing in real estate in Florida. He bought a pre-construction condo in Lantana and then a second one shortly after. Real estate quickly became an obsession for him, leading to the purchase of a third condo. Despite recognizing that he was stretching himself financially, he was drawn in by the booming market. Frankie, however, was concerned about his investments and questioned their practicality. Nonetheless, Neil was resolute in his decision and was not willing to change his plans. With his properties piling up in Florida, Neil began pushing Frankie to relocate. She was resistant, hesitant to leave behind the life they had built in New Jersey. She loved their home, their community, and the stability they had created. But as time passed, the financial strain of maintaining their New Jersey home became overwhelming. Eventually, Frankie reluctantly agreed to the move. The Jacobsons officially settled in Florida, eager to start a new chapter close to family. However, things did not go as planned. Neil had hoped to sell their New Jersey home before the move, but the market wasn't in his favor. Just 2 months after they arrived in Florida, tragedy struck. Harold Jacobson passed away. The loss of his father devastated Neil in ways he hadn't expected. He had uprooted his entire life to be closer to Harold, only to lose him so soon after arriving. The grief weighed heavily on him, and his mother, Goldie, later revealed that Neil had struggled with his mental health from a young age. She recalled that as a teenager, he had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, an issue that had plagued him for years. Doctors had noted that Neil had an overwhelming desire to be the perfect child, a pressure that followed him into adulthood. As the years passed, his struggles with anxiety only grew, and soon, things took an even darker turn. The Great Recession hit Florida hard, and Neil, who worked as a mortgage broker. The real estate market collapsed, and the once thriving business that had allowed him to invest so freely was now crumbling beneath him. The financial security he had worked so hard to build was slipping away. As the weight of his losses grew heavier, so did the cracks in his once stable world. The Florida condos he had invested in before relocating were quickly turning into a financial nightmare. Burdened with subprime mortgages, their payments increased month after month, stretching his resources thin. At first, Neil had convinced himself that things would turn around. He had always been a problem solver, always finding ways to make things work. But this time, no amount of determination could keep the walls from closing in. With little to no work coming in, and 4 separate mortgages draining their finances. At first, Neil and Frankie tried to hold on, dipping into their savings to stay afloat. But as time passed, their financial situation only worsened. Bills piled up, debt collectors began calling, and the stress of trying to keep everything together was pushing Neil to his limits. Desperate for a solution, he started making risky financial decisions, one bad choice after another, each one digging them deeper into a hole. He chased after risky investments, sought out loans, all in a futile attempt to stop the inevitable collapse. Eventually, the weight of it all became too much to bear. The financial juggling act had run its course. Frankie was exhausted and drained, made the painful decision to stop paying the mortgages on their 3 Florida condos. It was a move that felt like surrender, but they had no choice. There was simply no more money left to give. By the year 2008, the pressure of Neil's business failures had begun to take a serious toll on his health. At first, it started with minor complaints, aches and pains that he couldn't quite explain, but as time went on, his symptoms worsened. He became sluggish, struggling to muster the energy for even the most basic tasks. His body felt heavy, and his mind clouded. He experienced random bouts of dizziness that left him feeling unstable, and he found himself unable to focus the way he used to. Concerned, he visited the family doctor, who ordered a blood test. In October, the results were troubling. Neil had elevated hormone levels, but there was no immediate explanation for his decline. As the weeks passed, his condition only worsened. The once energetic and determined man was now lethargic, withdrawn, barely functioning. He was eventually diagnosed with depression and transient peripheral vertigo, a condition that further contributed to his constant dizziness. In an attempt to help him cope, his doctor prescribed Zoloft, a common antidepressant. Neil, desperate to feel better, took the medication as prescribed, hoping it would offer some relief. But instead of improving, his mental state deteriorated further. A few days after starting Zoloft, he was called back to the doctor's office, where they added a prescription for Xanax. It was meant to ease his anxiety, but his family and friends quickly noticed that something wasn't right. Instead of stabilizing his mood, the medication seemed to send him spiraling even further into darkness. His paranoia intensified, his emotions became more erratic, and Neil they had once known began to fade before their eyes. Neil's sister, Deborah, became deeply concerned about her brother's rapid decline. She confided in their mother, worried about what he was going through. According to Deborah, Neil had started experiencing terrifying hallucinations. He had grown increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone or something was out to get him. Frankie, his wife, was just as alarmed. She desperate for support as Neil's behavior became more and more disturbing. He had completely withdrawn from the world, he refused to go outside, stopped engaging with friends and family, and even neglected his own hygiene. There were days when he wouldn't even shower, lost in a haze of fear and depression. His paranoia took a terrifying turn when he became obsessed with the idea that the FBI was watching him. He was convinced that federal agents were surveilling him, gathering evidence to have him arrested. He would talk about it constantly, warning anyone who would listen that they were building a case against him. His delusions became more elaborate. He was certain that his phone was tapped, that his home was under surveillance, and that at any moment, the authorities would storm in, take him away. His mother saw the full extent of his paranoia. One of the last times she visited him, Neil pulled her aside, his voice shaking with fear. He told her he was in big trouble, insisting that the FBI was coming for him, that he had done something terrible, though he couldn't seem to explain exactly what. The fear in his eyes was real, raw, and overwhelming. As Neil's mind unraveled, January 23, 2010. The darkness he had been wrestling with for months finally took over, and what happened next would shock everyone who had ever known him. That morning, Neil stood before his wardrobe, fumbling with the top shelf, his hands shaking as he retrieved a loaded gun. His wife, Frankie, still groggy from sleep, watched in confusion, not yet realizing the horror that was unfolding before her. Neil, with the gun in hand, stepped out of the wardrobe, his face hardening into something almost unrecognizable. Frankie's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. In an instant, panic took over. She leapt toward him, struggling desperately to wrest the weapon from his grasp. They tumbled to the floor, the fight becoming a chaotic blur of screams, desperation, and tears. In the midst of the struggle, Neil, in a violent frenzy, struck Frankie, knocking out her front tooth and slicing her finger. Despite the brutality of it all, Frankie didn't give up. She fought with all her strength, but Neil was too much, overpowering her in his disturbed state. With cold detachment, he stood, reloaded the gun, and turned the weapon on her. 2 shots rang out one after another, each striking her in the face, silencing her forever. But Neil's twisted path didn't end there, covered in Frankie's blood. He reloaded the gun and made his way to his son Eric's room. Eric, who had been lying on his stomach in peaceful sleep, was the next victim in the nightmare that Neil had somehow constructed in his mind. 2 bullets tore through Eric's body, but against all odds, the boy survived the first 2 shots. However, Neil was undeterred, his mind fixated on finishing what he had started. He grabbed a pillow and pressed it over Eric's face, ensuring his son wouldn't survive. 2 more shots, and Eric was gone. The house was eerily still now as Neil moved toward the next room, where his youngest son Joshua was sleeping. Joshua, blissfully unaware of the carnage around him, lay curled in his sheets. Neil's actions were methodical, almost as if he were following a script. He covered his son's face with a pillow, silencing him with 2 shots to the face. In a matter of moments, the vibrant lives of his family had been extinguished, with the blood of his wife and children staining his hands. Neil walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. He stood under the water, numb, as if washing away the sins he could no longer escape. When the shower ended, he dressed, swallowed a cocktail of Vicodin and Xanax, in a haze, left his home. As he drove, the pills began to take effect, making him groggy and disoriented. Less than a mile from his mother's house, Neil passed out behind the wheel, swerving off the road and coming to a stop in the grass. Neil had initially planned to kill his mother, next before taking his own life. But in his twisted state, something inside him held him back. He later told the police that when he was at home, standing in a living room, he thought about going to heaven to be with his father, but he couldn't leave his mother alone, so he planned to take her with him. Thankfully, he never made it to her house. When the police found him, Neil was disoriented, barely conscious, and gripping the gun beside him. As they approached, he muttered, "I killed my family," in a dazed and broken voice. The investigation raised many questions. Was Neil a victim of the side effects of his medications, or had he planned this horrific act all along? A suicide note found later suggested that Neil may have been preparing for this moment, leaving many to wonder whether he was driven by his medications or if he had, at some point, simply snapped. His attorney's defense centered around his mental state. They argued that he had been suffering from severe depression, anxiety, and paranoia, all of which had been worsened by the medications he was taking. They described Neil overwhelmed by financial ruin, haunted by the fear that the FBI was watching him, and convinced that there was no way out. His legal team insisted that he had not acted out of hatred or rage but had instead been driven to an unimaginable breaking point due to the side effects of his prescription drugs. To support their argument, the defense brought in medical experts who testified about the dangers of Zoloft and Xanax, the 2 medications Neil had been prescribed before the murders. These drugs, they explained, could cause extreme mood swings, hallucinations, and suicidal tendencies, especially when taken together in high doses. Neil's behavior before the killings, his paranoia, delusions, and refusal to leave the house, was presented as clear evidence that he had lost his grip on reality. His lawyers pushed the narrative that Neil had been a loving father and husband, a man who had never shown any signs of violence before, making it hard to believe that he had killed his family intentionally. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They painted Neil not as a victim of medication but as a desperate man who had methodically planned the murders. They argued that his financial troubles had reached a boiling point, and that instead of facing them, he had chosen to take his family's lives in an act of ultimate control. They pointed to the way he had executed the killings, retrieving his gun, reloading it multiple times, and ensuring that no one survived. To them, this was not the act of a man lost in a haze of confusion but one who had made a deliberate and calculated decision. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence against Neil was the suicide note found in his home. The note indicated that he had thought through his actions and accepted what he was about to do. It wasn't the frantic scribblings of someone in the middle of a psychotic episode, it was organized, reflective in the prosecution's view, proof of premeditation. If he had truly been unaware of his actions, why would he have left behind such a message? The prosecution also called witnesses to testify about Neil's behavior leading up to the murders. His sister, Deborah, had noticed a dramatic shift in his personality. He had become increasingly paranoid. His wife, Frankie, had confided in Deborah that Neil was no longer the man she had married. He had stopped showering, refused to leave the house, and seemed trapped in his own mind. While the defense used these accounts to argue that Neil was suffering from a mental breakdown, the prosecution used them to show that there had been warning signs, signs that should have led Neil to seek professional help instead of resorting to murder. Neil's mother, Goldie, also played a heartbreaking role in the trial. She had been one of the last people to see him before the tragedy. She recalled how Neil had told her, "Mom, I love you, no matter what happens." The courtroom fell silent. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but in hindsight, it was clear he had been preparing for what he was about to do. Goldie, who had always seen her son as a kind and loving man. She struggled to reconcile the Neil she knew with the one on trial for murder. As the trial progressed, the jury was left to decide whether Neil Jacobson had truly been in a state of antidepressants-induced psychosis or if he had coldly and deliberately murdered his wife and children. The prosecution emphasized that Neil had made a series of conscious choices, loading his gun, aiming at his loved ones, and pulling the trigger multiple times. They argued that no matter what struggles he was facing, nothing justified what he had done. The defense, on the other hand, urged the jury to consider his mental state, to see him as a broken man who had been consumed by fear, paranoia, and desperation. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict: guilty on all counts. The judge, while acknowledging the tragedy of the situation, made it clear that no level of financial distress or mental illness excused the murder of innocent children and a devoted wife. Neil Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the courtroom was filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. Neil Jacobson reached a plea deal with the state. He changed his plea from not guilty to guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He stated that the reason was the family's mounting financial situation. Now, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Neil Jacobson answered to the judge in the Palm Beach County courtroom, admitting that he shot his wife, Frankie, and then shot their twin 7-year-old sons while they were asleep in their Wellington home back. During the family's turn to speak in court, Neil held his head down and never looked up. Even after the trial ended, many questions remained. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Neil had received different treatment? Were the medications to blame, or was he simply a man who refused to face his failures? No one could say for certain what had driven him to this point. However, what was undeniable was that a mother and 2 young boys had lost their lives in the most horrific way possible. Nothing could ever undo that. It was here in 1985 that Captain Gary Eastburn lived with his wife Catherine and their 3 daughters, about 10 minutes from the base where he served. Shortly before the events in question, Captain Gary received a promotion, which required him to undergo training at officer school. Consequently, he had to leave his family for a while, attending officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, for about 10 weeks. This was an important step, as the family was planning to move to England, where Gary could serve in the Royal Air Force. Gary had a strong marriage that lasted for 10 years, and they kept in touch while separated. However, on Saturday, May 11, 1985, Gary tried to call his wife several times, but to no avail. He took advantage of several breaks to call but never received an answer. Finally, he reached out to one of his friends who remained on Fort Bragg and asked him to check on his wife. The man did so, but when he knocked on the door, no one answered. He couldn't wait forever, so he simply left Catherine a note, asking her to call her husband back as soon as she could. While shining a flashlight and walking around the house, the friend accidentally woke up a neighbor named Bob Seafelt. When Gary called Bob, he mentioned that he had no idea what was going on with Catherine, but everything seemed strange. After a fitful night's sleep, Bob woke up the next day, with troubling thoughts swirling in his mind. He noticed that a stack of newspapers had piled up near the neighbor's door and realized he had last seen Catherine leave for the store on Thursday. Bob went to the neighbor's door and knocked, but no one answered. Listening closely, it seemed to Bob that he could hear a child crying inside. Knowing the family well, he assumed it was the youngest daughter, who was about 2 years old at the time. Concerned about the situation, Bob called the police at 12:53 p.m. and asked them to check on the family. When the patrolman arrived at the scene, they began the standard procedure and shone his flashlight through the windows. They saw the baby in a crib, appearing pale and emaciated. Despite the protocol the officer needed to follow, they instinctively felt that something alarming had occurred. A patrolman immediately cut through the window screen and entered the house. Upon entering, he saw the baby girl, who was alive but in dire condition. Later, authorities reported that a few more hours in that house could have been fatal for her. After handing the baby over to his partner, the patrolman returned inside the house, checking the rooms with his weapon drawn. In the main bedroom, he discovered the lifeless body of 3-year-old Erin Eastburn. A pillow covered the child's face, and it was apparent that her throat had been cut, with her head nearly severed from her body. She lay on the floor next to her parents' bed, where Catherine also lay. A pillow covered Catherine's face as well. When the officer removed it, he saw that her throat was cut, she was naked and had suffered multiple stab wounds, indicating she had been abused. The scene was horrifying, with blood everywhere. The patrolman ran outside, trying to catch his breath, when he was reminded that the family had 3 children. They still needed to find one more child who might be alive and in danger. He returned to the house, found Kara, but there were no signs of life. The 5-year-old had died in the same manner as her mother and sister. When the investigation began, detectives quickly noticed that a similar crime had occurred 15 years earlier involving a military family, the MacDonald family, who were killed in a similar fashion. This crime was committed by a military man, a husband and father named Jeffrey. Numerous coincidences were found in the handwriting of the criminals and the circumstances of these 2 murders, suggesting that they could have been committed by the same person. However, at the time of the massacre of the Eastburn family, Jeffrey MacDonald was already behind bars and could not have been involved in this crime. Rumors spread quickly, leading many to believe that Jeffrey MacDonald could have had an accomplice or an imitator. Forensic experts found blood all over the house, as well as clear traces of cleaning in some places, indicated by X stains of blood. It was obvious that the criminal had tried to clean up but left even more traces. Using luminol, investigators could see that the marks had been erased on the bathroom door handles. Likely, the perpetrator used a towel that had been thrown into the laundry basket. The crime was believed to have been committed between 8 p.m. on May 9 and 3 a.m. on May 10, 1985. As it turns out, the last person to see the family alive was the nanny, Julie. The young girl had been babysitting the youngest daughter for several days before their bodies were found and was automatically placed on the suspect list. Julie mentioned prank calls that Catherine had complained about before she was killed. Some man had been calling several times a day for 3 months, but it didn't particularly bother Catherine. She didn't feel any danger from these calls and never went to the police. Julie remembered another person with whom Catherine had been in contact, a certain Angela who was going to take the dog from the Eastburns, Dixie. Due to plans to move, they decided to give it away because there was no one to leave it with. According to the nanny, Catherine had left an ad in the newspaper, and after that, she received a call from Angela. Julie was curious about what happened next and unexpectedly shifted the focus back to the bloody crime of 15 years ago. She was worried that it could have been committed by a copycat of Jeffrey MacDonald and wanted to know what the police thought about it. The detective had no trouble getting the suspicious nanny to talk. She willingly shared her long friendship with Dr. MacDonald, believing that he was innocent. They had known each other for a long time and even exchanged letters for several years while he was in prison. When she was asked about her interest in the case, she was unable to justify his behavior, and the detective did not pay much attention to her words. When she confirmed her alibi, he simply removed her from the list of suspects. The police continued to work in the Eastburn house even after midnight, despite the late hour. A young man named Patrick Cohn approached them and decided to tell them about what he saw on the night of Friday, May 10, 1985, at about 3:30 a.m. He noticed a tall, fair-skinned man in jeans, a knitted hat, and a black jacket leaving Eastburn house. The man was carrying a garbage bag slung over his shoulder, got into his white Chevrolet Chevette, and drove away. Patrick's statement was taken seriously, and he was brought to the police station to help create a composite sketch. When the portrait was finished, there was a striking resemblance to a serviceman named Timothy Hennis. He was a 27-year-old man who, along with his younger brother and sister, had been adopted by the Hennis family, a couple who took all 3 of their children from an orphanage. They grew up in a fairly well-off family in Minnesota, which provided them with a bright future. Shortly before these tragic events, Tim married Angela in secret before Christmas in 1984. That same year, Tim's brother died in a motorcycle accident, so they opted for a modest celebration instead of a lavish ceremony. A couple of years later, they had a daughter, Christina. Tim admitted that he was familiar with the victim, Catherine, but there was a good reason for it. They decided to get dog for company, leading to the contact with the woman from the ad. Tim denied any involvement in the crime but mentioned a curious coincidence. He had arranged to meet Catherine on Tuesday, May 7th, just 3 days before the crime, to look at Dixie. When Tim first met the police, everyone was amazed because he looked exactly like the composite sketch. The police asked him to sign a waiver of Miranda rights, to which he agreed, provided he could be assured that he was not a suspect, which turned out to be a ruse. Timothy provided fingerprints, hair samples, saliva, and blood. He confirmed that he had indeed met Catherine that Tuesday and had taken her dog, after which they had not seen each other again. Timothy denied any involvement in the crime and provided a detailed account. Witness Patrick was called to identify him, and he pointed to Timothy. Despite Timothy's insistence that he had not been in the area early in the morning of May 10th, suspicions against him grew stronger due to his lack of an alibi. The police did not yet have an arrest warrant, so Timothy was released. However, after 7 hours, he was detained, officially charged with triple first-degree murder and abuse. Naturally, Timothy was not the only suspect. As is often the case, the police first considered the widower Gary Eastburn. When Gary was informed of the events, he remained surprisingly calm and simply asked if at least one family member had survived. When he learned that only the youngest daughter had survived, he broke down in tears. Gary had grown up as an ordinary young man. At the age of 12, his parents divorced, and his relationship with his stepfather did not work out. Despite this, he had a relatively calm childhood. He met Catherine in 1972, approximately 13 years before the tragedy. At that time, he was around 25 years old, having been born in 1947. Their daughter Kara was born in 1980. Gary decided to become a military man to support his growing family. When he finally returned to the city after the tragedy, he wanted to reach his surviving child. Instead, he was immediately taken to the police station for questioning, where they held him until about 2 a.m. Gary provided a reliable alibi. His blood and hair samples were taken before he was released. He was able to see his daughter late at night. She was in serious condition and did not even recognize him. Afterward, he went into their home to see what was missing. Gary had no idea who could have attacked his wife and children. They had no obvious enemies, but he remembered several prank calls that had started a few months before he left for training at officer school. The caller addressed Catherine by her first and last name, but no one paid attention to it at the time. Everyone thought it was just teenagers playing around, so no one raised the alarm. Now, in light of the tragic events, the calls seemed more suspicious. However, they could not be tracked due to a lack of technology at that time. After inspecting the house, the police reported that a metal safe containing important family documents was missing, along with $300 in cash that had been set aside for Christmas and Catherine's wallet with bank cards. This provided valuable clues. The ATM was identified, and it turned out that a transaction was made using Catherine's card. It was used shortly after the murders, including a transaction on May 11th. Detectives found a witness who provided a description of the man who came at night to withdraw cash, and this description exactly matched Timothy Hennis. In addition, she saw a white car belonging to Timothy. At this stage, the whole city already knew about the crime and the main suspect. Other witnesses also came forward. Timothy's neighbor saw him burning something in his backyard the day after the murder, likely getting rid of evidence. A local dry cleaner reported that Timothy had brought them a black jacket right after the crime. According to the description, it resembled the clothing that the witness Patrick had described. Timothy was questioned when his ex-wife said he had come to visit her that fateful night. His landlord mentioned that Timothy had not paid the rent for the house, which had accumulated over $300 in debt, but as soon as the eviction notice was served on May 10th, Timothy paid it off almost immediately. But where did he get the money so quickly? It seems strange that the same amount disappeared from the home of the murdered family. Indirect evidence against Timothy was accumulating, but there was no irrefutable proof. By Christmas, it was decided to allow the suspect to post bail with the help of his relatives, and he managed to raise the funds. The reason for this leniency was the results of laboratory tests indicating that his biological materials did not match any evidence, specifically, his blood type did not match. However, this could be attributed to the low accuracy of the testing methods used at that time. The prosecutor's office decided to turn to the only survivor of that bloody night, 2-year-old Jana. After the tragedy, the girl had not been able to come to her senses for a long time, but by February of the following year, she finally spoke. Gary was categorically against involving his daughter in the investigation, fearing that she would suffer further psychological trauma, but under pressure from the police, he ultimately agreed in order to seek justice for the victims. A special psychologist from North Carolina held 5 recorded conversations with Jana. During this time, she experienced several panic attacks and was still unable to recognize Timothy's photo. Based on the results of these sessions, it remained unclear whether there was one perpetrator or multiple criminals. Thus, the prosecutor's office decided to refuse to use Jana's testimony in the case. The trial was set for April 27, 1986. Timothy rejected the plea bargain offered by the prosecution. His lawyer wanted to change the location of the hearing but ultimately decided it would not make much difference. Instead, the defense focused on refuting the numerous circumstantial evidence on which the prosecution's case was based. The lawyer argued that the witness Patrick was lying when he claimed to have seen Timothy, described his appearance and car in such detail, especially since it had happened at night. He questioned how Patrick could have seen all of this in the dark. The lawyer discovered that the witness was going through a difficult time and had been pressured by the police. During numerous meetings with Timothy's lawyer, Patrick admitted that he might have made a mistake during the identification. The more he talked with the defense, the less certain he became about having seen Timothy on the street that night. On the day of the trial, the lawyer tried to get Patrick to admit that he had participated in the identification under pressure from detectives, but he did not. The defense discovered something even more significant. During the investigation, the police had gained access to the Fort Bragg duty log, which showed that Tim was on duty at the time of the crime, but this page mysteriously disappeared during the investigation. The lawyer believed that the detectives had intentionally torn out this page. Now, the defense attorney pressed this fact, interpreting the police's behavior as an attempt to convict an innocent person by destroying evidence of his innocence. Timothy's family was away at the time of the crime. The prosecution proposed a theory that Timothy had taken advantage of his wife's absence to start a romantic relationship with Catherine and visited her home on that fateful evening. However, Catherine rejected his advances, which angered him, leading him to kill her and her 2 children. The discussion then turned to the bank card. It was determined that the payment method had been used at 2:52 a.m. on May 11th when the defendant was on duty. Although this could not be confirmed, there was reasonable doubt that Timothy could have used it. Even though there was still no confirmed alibi for the night of the crime, the lawyers systematically managed to destroy the majority of the prosecution's arguments and raised doubts among the jury in order to convince them of Timothy's innocence. The prosecution presented frightening photographs from the crime scene and autopsies of the victims, about 100 photographs, which were included in a slideshow that lasted more than an hour. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Despite the defense attorney's desperate attempts to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence, on July 4, 1986, Timothy Hennis was found guilty on all counts. The defense attorney believed that the main reason for this verdict was their failure to insist on a change of venue. He felt that his job was not finished since Timothy was sentenced to death, so he focused on saving his client's life. Interestingly, just a few days after starting his sentence, Timothy received a postcard in prison signed by Mr. X. In it, a mysterious stranger claimed responsibility for killing Timothy's family and apologized for Timothy serving time for his crimes. Mr. X admitted that he had left North Carolina and had no intention of returning. Timothy informed his lawyer about the postcard. Later, it was used at the retrial, but at the time of its receipt, the prosecutor dismissed it as a forgery. During this period, Timothy's parents rallied around him. Despite their divorce, they made every effort to save enough money to pay for his defense. The Supreme Court of North Carolina was approached, and the lawyers cited bias, arguing that the jury had been provoked by the photographs. The defense insisted that nearly 100 gruesome images from the massacre were guaranteed to elicit a negative reaction from the jury. Despite the lack of irrefutable evidence against Timothy, it came to light that several detectives who led the case were nearing retirement. The lawyers believed they simply did not want to leave behind an unsolved crime of such magnitude and were seeking a scapegoat, which they considered Timothy Hennis to be. The defense successfully secured a change of venue to Wilmington, a coastal town located 100 kilometers from Fayetteville. The new prosecutor agreed to this change without hesitation, confident in the prosecution's tactics, but the defense was well prepared and closed all loopholes except for one. There was still no reliable confirmation of the defendant's whereabouts on the night of the murder. The defense aimed to discredit the prosecution's main witness, Patrick, in court. During the interval between the first and second trials, Patrick had committed several minor offenses, including driving without a license. When stopped by the authorities, he advised them to contact the district attorney since he was a witness in the Timothy case. The lawyers believed this statement practically indicated that he had received a bribe from the very beginning. More thorough examinations of the collected evidence refuted the case against Timothy. The shoe prints found inside the house were 3 sizes smaller than his. There was blood on a towel in the bathroom, as well as other traces that did not match his profile. The defense presented a black jacket to the judge that was tested for bloodstains. Even the hair found on Catherine's body did not belong to Timothy. In this context, the numerous circumstantial pieces of evidence that the prosecutor's office had used in the first trial appeared less convincing during the retrial. The prosecution attempted to challenge all the defense's arguments with their own versions, but none of this was compelling in light of the thorough preparation from the defense. 2 days later, the jury found Timothy not guilty on all counts. It is noteworthy that during this hearing, only a few photographs from the crime scene were shown, as opposed to the 100 images in a lengthy slideshow during the first trial. 3 years later, Timothy was released from death row. He re-enlisted in military service, served in Saudi Arabia and Somalia, and then returned to the United States. In 1998, Timothy and his family settled in Fort Lewis, Washington. In 2004, he retired from the Army and took a job at a waste processing plant. He also became a Boy Scout leader. Meanwhile, widower Gary followed his plan and moved with his surviving daughter to the UK. In 2009, he served in the Royal Air Force, after which he married a nurse. In 2009, after leaving the Air Force, Gary returned to the U.S. and settled in Washington. Subsequently, legislation was amended to prohibit retrials for individuals already convicted twice of the same crime. Disagreements arose on the basis that during the first trial, Timothy was in military service, thereby placing him under a different jurisdiction. This left the state in limbo, although it did not exclude the possibility that he could be brought to retrial. Despite such situations being rare in the state's judicial practice, they did not return to the case for almost 20 years. It seemed that life was improving, but the case of the triple murder remained unsolved. Finally, in 2006, a detective investigating particularly brutal murders decided to test the DNA materials collected from the body of Catherine. However, the only information the laboratory could provide at that time was that the collected samples belonged to a light-skinned individual. By 2010, the laboratory in North Carolina became embroiled in a significant scandal. It turned out that over the past decade and a half, the state crime lab systematically concealed or manipulated evidence to ensure convictions. This was revealed in at least 230 cases, 10 of which resulted in the wrongful conviction of innocent people sentenced to death. 3 of them even received lethal injections and were deprived of life. The DNA in the Eastburn case was retested, and the examination showed that the materials from the crime scene in the archive matched those of Timothy Hennis. In light of such convincing evidence, his trial was reopened for the 3rd time. Timothy hired the best military lawyer named Frank Spinner to lead his defense team. The lawyer attempted to tarnish the reputation of the victim, Catherine, by alleging that she was promiscuous with Timothy, hinting that that was why his DNA might have turned up in her home. Timothy argued that she was unfaithful to him and that the real killer was an individual named Mr. X, who had written a postcard to him while he was in prison. This attempt had the opposite effect. The prosecutor's office pointed out the obvious lie, as Timothy had previously denied any intimate contact with Catherine. He later claimed that he initially did not disclose the affair due to fear of exposure. Despite a fierce struggle for Timothy's freedom, the chosen tactics now appeared unconvincing. On April 15, 2010, a jury recommended that Hennis be sentenced to death. In addition, he was demoted to Private E1, stripped of all pay and allowances, dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Hennis was incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where he remains to this day. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Under U.S. legislation, without the president's approval, they cannot execute him. Therefore, the likelihood that he will be deprived of life is low. The U.S. military has not executed anyone from its ranks since 1961. Interestingly, in 1985, when the murders of the Eastburn family occurred, a 20-year-old woman from Rochester, Minnesota, where Tim had lived for a long time, contacted the police to share her story. Upon hearing about the triple murder in North Carolina, she revealed that at the age of 11, she had been abused by Timothy Hennis. Unfortunately, due to a data error, she was not permitted to testify. Had she been allowed to do so, the outcome of the second trial, when he was acquitted, could have been entirely different, and he would most likely have been found guilty again. Even now, this trial raises more questions than answers. The story of the nanny, who cared for the Eastburn children, also raises many questions. Julie was addicted, and there were witnesses who heard her confess to the crime. Additionally, her unhealthy obsession with Jeffrey MacDonald, with whom she even corresponded, raises further doubts. Some supporters of Timothy believe that it was Julie who could have imitated her idol and killed the family with whom she worked. Oscar Pistorius, a famous Paralympic champion, is originally from South Africa and lives in the city of Pretoria. He was born on November 22, 1986, with a serious developmental disorder that caused his legs to be thin and underdeveloped. Oscar's family went through many hardships, and his parents often argued. He had a younger sister, and after her birth, his parents decided to divorce. However, his father continued to support the family financially. Oscar's mother taught him that one should not give up in difficult situations, but should fight instead. Growing up, Oscar was an active child. When he was just 1 year old, he had to have his legs amputated below the knee because they were not growing. At 17 months old, he was fitted with his first prosthetic legs. As Oscar grew older, he became stronger and decided to pursue a career in sports. He initially played rugby and water polo, but after injuring his kneecap as a teenager, he was advised to take up athletics for rehabilitation. Over time, his passion for athletics developed, particularly for short-distance running. At the age of 15, Oscar lost his mother, who had been his close friend and supporter in all his endeavors. This loss deeply affected him, leading to emotional distress, but he remained determined to continue his training and pursue his goals. His hard work paid off when, at 17, he won a bronze medal in the 100-meter race and a gold medal in the 200-meter race at the Athens Paralympic Games in 2004. In 2007, he showcased his talent again by finishing second in the 400-meter race. Despite his young age, Oscar has achieved incredible success that many can only dream of. He has attracted significant media attention and built a large fan base, earning him the nickname "the man who runs on blades," due to his special prosthetic legs and impressive speed. By 2012, Oscar had reached the peak of his athletic career. During this time, he met Riva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old South African model and law graduate, through a mutual friend named Justin. They felt an instant connection, often described as love at first sight, and began dating. They officially got engaged in 2013. Riva grew up in Cape Town with her father, Barry, her mother, June Steenkamp, and 2 half-brothers. The family later moved to Port Elizabeth, where she pursued a law degree at university. Riva was not only intelligent, graduating with honors, but she was also very attractive. She started modeling at the age of 14, initially as a hobby, but soon began to take it more seriously. By the age of 29, she had become a well-known face in fashion magazines, frequently appearing on television and participating in various shows. However, her life wasn't without challenges. At 20, she was involved in a serious accident while riding. Riva's father, Barry, was a renowned horse trainer and breaker. He introduced his daughter to riding at a young age, starting her off with a pony. When Riva was 20, she suffered a serious lower back injury after falling from a horse, which required her to nearly relearn how to walk. By 2012, she had fully recovered and had achieved both wealth and fame, similar to Oscar. Their first meeting was unplanned, but they encountered each other again at a major award event where Oscar was being honored. Photographers captured them together, and the media quickly labeled them a stunning couple, taking numerous photos and asking questions. Both Riva and Oscar were talented in their respective fields and appeared to be a perfect match. Eventually, they developed feelings for each other, began dating, and got engaged. On Valentine's Day, February 14, 2013, Oscar and Riva celebrated 3 months of their relationship with a dinner at Oscar's home. Oscar lived in a mansion located within a gated community, where all the houses were similar to his and were surrounded by tall fences for security. The residents were very wealthy and took extensive measures to protect themselves, such as using CCTV cameras, combination locks, and other security systems. The cameras at the entrance captured the arrival of Oscar and Riva. They enjoyed a romantic candlelight dinner and stayed up late into the night. Later, someone told the police that they had heard the sound of weapons exploding in Oscar's villa. Emergency services quickly arrived at the scene where a crowd had gathered to understand what had happened. Paramedics entered the house and found a girl lying on the bathroom floor, covered in blood. After examining her, they realized she was beyond help. She was dead. Oscar was found in the house, in a state of shock. The police tried to calm him, but he was so distressed that he couldn't comprehend what they were saying. He cried and screamed, eventually managing to explain that he had killed her because he thought she was a burglar. According to Oscar, after dinner, he and Riva went to bed. Early the next morning, he went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air, predicting that it would be a hot day. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming from the bathroom. Although he knew Riva was in bed with him, he didn't check on her. Believing that someone had broken into the house, he took a weapon from the nightstand where he always kept it. In his youth, he had been attacked by an unstable person and had received threats from envious individuals, which is why he took security seriously and kept weapons at home. That morning, however, he hadn't put on his prostheses and felt defenseless. When he heard a noise behind the bathroom door, he attacked it, trying to act quickly. Unfortunately, there was no burglar, only Riva, who had woken up and gone to the bathroom. Upon realizing her tragic mistake, she screamed for help, but it was too late. An investigation showed that Riva had been attacked 4 times. The first bullet struck her thigh, the second ricocheted and hit her back, the third shot hit her shoulder, and the final, fatal shot struck her head, killing her instantly. An investigation showed that Riva had been attacked 4 times. The first bullet struck her thigh, the second ricocheted and hit her back, the third shot hit her shoulder, and the final, fatal shot struck her head, killing her instantly. Early in the morning, Riva's family received a phone call that filled June, her mother, with dread. She hesitated to answer, knowing that calls at such an early hour often bring bad news. Inspector Bada delivered the heartbreaking information, causing her world to crumble. She struggled to stay upright as her legs gave way. Riva's father experienced several heart attacks after learning of her death. The next time they would see their daughter would be at the crematorium to say their goodbyes. Riva's mother, June, quickly informed the police of her concerns about Oscar, noting that her daughter and Oscar had ongoing issues. Although they were still in a relationship which had lasted only 3 months, it was clear that things were coming to an end. Riva's friend supported this perspective, revealing that Riva had expressed her desire to clarify their relationship on Valentine's Day and to break up amicably while remaining friends. Both the mother and friends shared similar views on the situation. In contrast, Oscar's friends expressed a different opinion, claiming that he was very happy in his relationship with Riva. The murder of Riva, a well-known model, by Oscar, a prominent Paralympic athlete, attracted significant media attention, leading to varying public opinions about the incident. Some people believed Oscar's explanation that the attack was accidental, while others suspected he may have had intentions to harm Riva. The authorities had not reached a consensus on Oscar's version of the incident. Many aspects of Oscar's story seem to align with the details of his relationship with Riva. Friends of both Oscar and Riva stated that they were deeply in love, with Riva's friends confirming her happiness in this new relationship. She had previously experienced toxic relationships and felt fortunate to have found a good partner. Surveillance footage from a supermarket 2 days before the incident showed Oscar and Riva happily hugging and kissing while they shopped, appearing to be a couple in good spirits. This footage was presented as evidence during the investigation. However, a confusing detail emerged. Riva's friend claimed that she planned to visit Oscar's house on Valentine's Day to end their relationship, which raises questions. Why would she choose such a romantic day for a breakup? Additionally, during a police search of Oscar's home, they discovered a gift that Riva had prepared for him, a beautifully decorated frame with a collage of their happy moments together, accompanied by a heartfelt note expressing her love. This made it hard to believe that she intended to break up with him before giving such a romantic gift. The trial received significant media coverage, revealing an important detail. Oscar was deeply concerned about his safety and feared that someone might break into his house at night. This fear had troubled him since childhood, possibly inherited from his mother. After Oscar's parents separated, his mother and the children continued to live in a cottage where a thief had once broken in. Oscar, who has used prosthetic legs since birth, would take them off at home, leaving him vulnerable and unable to escape in an emergency. This fear was corroborated by Oscar's psychologist and his brother's friends. The weapon he had that morning was unlicensed and intended for self-defense. Riva's mother, June, informed the police that Riva's relationship with Oscar had recently taken a turn for the worse. A friend of Riva confirmed this, and several neighbors provided further insight. One woman testified that she heard Riva scream the night of the murder, describing it as a scream filled with fear, indicating that Riva was terrified for her life. Another neighbor, called as a witness by the defense, claimed he heard screams too, but he was convinced they were from a man, not a woman. Furthermore, during the trial, it was revealed that Riva was found on the bathroom floor, with the door locked and her mobile phone in hand. While it was normal for her to get up at night to use the bathroom, the locked door raises questions, particularly because she brought her phone with her. The prosecution investigated Oscar's history and discovered that years ago, he was involved in a serious boating accident on a river. He crashed into an obstacle and required immediate medical attention. Doctors performed surgery to repair his broken jaw and ribs, providing over 100 stitches. He was also diagnosed with a concussion and remained in a coma for several days. When police arrived at the scene, they found numerous empty beer bottles at the bottom of the boat. Eyewitnesses reported that Oscar was driving recklessly, screaming and laughing, while the boat sped down the river. After the accident, Oscar insisted he hadn't been drinking, but police tests revealed he was under the influence of alcohol. Additionally, it was revealed that Oscar had a long-standing problem with alcohol addiction. On March 3, 2014, the trial for the murder of Riva began. On September 12, Oscar Pistorius was found guilty of manslaughter because the judge determined that he did not intend to kill his girlfriend. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. This sentence was considered lenient, and with good behavior, Oscar could have been released early. Over the years, Oscar gained many enemies and became concerned for his safety. The most notable adversary was prosecutor Jerry Nell, nicknamed Bull Terrier. After reviewing the case, he remarked, "Oscar is talking nonsense," and began searching for inconsistencies in Oscar's story. Jerry Nell, a dedicated professional, recognized that he was dealing with a man who had taken another person's life and sought true justice. After several court appeals, Jerry Nell succeeded in having Oscar's lenient sentence overturned. 2 years later, Oscar was back in court, facing charges of premeditated murder. Before the hearing began, the prosecutor wanted to speak with Oscar privately while he was under house arrest. He reminded Oscar that his home was protected by a 3-meter fence topped with electrified wire, along with an expensive security system and numerous motion sensors. Given this, where did the idea of a robber come from? The autopsy results showed that Riva had food in her stomach that she had eaten at 1 a.m., suggesting that she and Oscar had not gone to bed that night. The prosecutor suspected that Oscar was feeling jealousy toward Riva. As she prepared to leave, he became enraged. When Riva locked herself in the bathroom out of fear, he began attacking. This raised several questions. Why did Oscar start attacking? Why didn't he call the police if he believed a robber was in the bathroom? And why did he continue to attack after the first shot, especially when he heard Riva's screams? Overwhelmed by the prosecutor's portrayal of that night, Oscar struggled to respond. Jerry Nell assured Oscar that they would address many unanswered questions in court. The trial eventually took place, resulting in the judge sentencing Oscar Pistorius to 6 years in prison, a sentence that was similar to the original one. Oscar's lawyers later filed an appeal, which led to an increase in his sentence to 13 years and 6 months. As of 2023, Oscar can apply for parole, but he is still serving time in prison. Despite his repeated requests to be transferred to a different facility due to his fear of potential violence from other inmates, these requests were never granted. This marked the end of Oscar Pistorius' sporting career and public admiration. He was once a national hero, but his actions not only took the lives of others but also ruined his own promising future.